dhidi ya athari ambazo zimekuwa zikikumba bara hili la Afrika, na vilevile kuweza kuhakikisha kuwa wanapoenda katika makongamano yale ya mataifa yote ya ulimwengu wanaweza kuwa na msimamo mmoja ili waweze kutetea bara hili la Afrika ambalo kwa mara nyingi limekuwa likipitia shida nyingi sana, licha ya kuwa bara hili ndilo linatoa gesi kidogo sana ambazo zinaathiri ulimwengu, lakini ukiweza kuangalia athari za mabadiliko ya tabia nchi, basi bara la Afrika ndilo linaathirika kwa zaidi. Basi tumeweza kuona kuwa baadhi ya marais ambao wameweza kufika katika kongamano hili. Hii leo tumeweza kuona yule wa Sierra Leone ambaye ni Mada Bio ameweza kuwasili. Rais wa Tanzania Samia Suluhu vilevile ashawasili. Evariste Ndayishimiye wa Burundi amewasili. Yule wa Sudan Kusini Salva Kiir amefika vilevile. Yule wa Egypt Abdel Fattah al-Sisi vilevile ameweza kuwasili. Wa Comoros Azali Assoumani vilevile amewasili, na vilevile mjumbe kutoka Marekani John Kerry vilevile alikuwepo hapo jana, akaweza vilevile kutoa maoni yake katika mijadala ambayo ilikuwa ikiendelea hapo jana, na vilevile hii leo atakuwepo katika mjadala ambao utakuwa ukifanyika katika ukumbi huu wa kimataifa wa KICC. Vilevile tumemwona rais wa Mozambique Filipe Nyusi aliweza kuwasili, na vilevile tumeweza kuona rais wa Rwanda ambaye ni Paul Kagame vilevile amewasili katika ukumbi huu wa kimataifa wa KICC. Vilevile rais wa Ethiopia ambaye ni Zade Wokzud vilevile ameweza kuwasili. Basi mtazamaji, kama unavyoona kwenye runinga yako ni kuwa shughuli nzima hapa katika ukumbi huu wa KICC upo shwari kabisa, tayari kuanza kongamano ama mijadala ambayo inatarajiwa kuweza kuanza hii leo, na itakuwa ikiongozwa na rais wa taifa hili Dr. William Ruto ambaye alifika mapema kabisa na amekuwa akiwapokea baadhi tu ya wajumbe na vilevile marais ambao wamekuwa wakiwasili katika ujumbe huu wa kimataifa wa KICC. Vilevile tumeweza kuona katibu mkuu wa Umoja wa Mataifa Antonio Guterres vilevile ameweza kuwasili katika ukumbi huu. Vilevile mwenyekiti wa Umoja wa Afrika ambaye ni Musa Faki vilevile yupo katika ukumbi huu, na wamekuwa wakiwapokea tu baadhi ya wajumbe na vilevile marais ambao wameweza kuwasili katika kongamano hili la kihistoria kabisa, ambalo ni kongamano la kwanza kabisa ambapo tumeweza kuona kuwa mataifa ya bara Afrika yameweza kufika ili kuweza kujadili na kupata suluhu dhidi ya athari ya mabadiliko ya hali ya hewa ama tabia nchi ambayo yamekuwa yakikumba mataifa mbalimbali. Baadhi tu ya mambo ambayo yanatarajiwa yaweze kujadiliwa katika kongamano hili la hii leo ni masuala kuhusiana na ufadhili wa miradi ambayo inaweza kukinga bara hili dhidi ya athari ambazo zimeweza kushuhudiwa katika mataifa mbalimbali, na vilevile kwani tumeweza kuona kuwa Afrika imekuwa katika sehemu ambayo imekuwa ikipata fedha kidogo sana katika kufadhili miradi ambayo inaweza kuwezesha kukata makali ya mabadiliko ya tabia nchi, lakini haijakuwa ikipata pesa hizo. Na vilevile tumeweza kuona kuwa licha kuwa baadhi ya mataifa ya Afrika yamekuwa yakipata mikopo tuseme, ama fedha kutoka kwa mataifa mengine na taasisi kuweza kusaidia katika athari za mabadiliko ya tabia nchi, hizi pesa hazijakuwa za kutosha, na hata hiyo mikopo ambayo imekuwa akipewa imekuja na riba ya juu sana, swala ambalo kwa sasa basi marais wengi wamesema kuwa itabidi wakae waweze kujadiliana, waweze kupata mwafaka na mfumo dhabiti ya kuhakikisha kuwa wanaweza kupata fedha, na hata kama ni mikopo wanapata basi ya kuweza kufadhili miradi hii, iwe ni mikopo ambayo ina riba ambayo inawafaa kama vile inavyofaa mataifa ambayo yameweza kuendelea. Ikishuhudiwa kuwa tumeweza kuona katibu mkuu wa Umoja wa Mataifa ameweza kuwasili hapa, basi tunatarajia kuwa tutaweza kusikia ni yepi ambaye ataweza kusema ili kuhakikisha kuwa hata Afrika basi inapoenda katika kongamano lile linalojulikana kama la COP28 ambalo linatarajiwa kuweza kufanyika katika sehemu ya kule Dubai, Afrika ikienda kama moja itakuwa na usemi upi, na itakapoenda na usemi huo utaweza kuchukuliwa vipi na Umoja wa Mataifa? Na Umoja wa Mataifa kama basi umeweza kuwasili katika kongamano hili maarufu sana la kihistoria, basi itaweza kusikiza kweli semi ambazo zitaweza kutolewa katika kongamano hili, na vilevile tunatarajia vilevile kuweza kuona sera ambazo zitaweza kujadiliwa katika mjadala huu ambao unatarajiwa kuweza kufanyika hii leo, na sera hizo zitakuwa zikigusia mambo yapi? baadhi ya mambo ambayo tunatarajia yaweze kuzungumziwa katika mjadala huu ni mambo kuhusiana na ufadhili wa miradi ya mabadiliko ya tabia nchi, na vilevile tumeweza kuona kuwa katika masoko ya kaboni vilevile tunatarajia kuweza kuona ni jinsi gani bara Afrika litaweza kukubaliwa kuweza kunadi kaboni ambayo inaweza kutolewa, na vilevile ikizingatiwa kuwa sisi ndio bara ambalo linatoa kaboni ya asilimia chini kabisa ambayo ni 4%. Basi itakuwa vipi? Tutaweza kupewa mkono wa juu kabisa katika masoko ya kaboni, na iwapo pia katika soko hilo fedha ambazo zitakuwa zikitolewa ama katika mnada huo wa kaboni zitakuwa zikienda vipi katika mataifa ya bara Afrika. Mtazamaji, kama unavyoona katika runinga yako ni kuwa wajumbe kutoka mataifa mbalimbali washawasili, wameketi tayari tu kusubiri kwanza ama kung'oa nanga kwa kikao maarufu sana ambacho kinatarajiwa kuweza kuanza muda si mchache. Kikao hicho kitakuwa kikiongozwa na Rais Dr. William Ruto akiwa na wenzake kutoka mataifa mbalimbali barani Afrika ambao nilikuwa nimekueleza kuwa wameweza kuwasili. Baadhi tu ya marais, mtazamaji, ambao naweza kukujuza ambao wameweza kuwasili katika kongamano hili spesheli sana la kihistoria ambalo linafanyika kwa mara ya kwanza kabisa, kama Rais Dr. William Ruto alivyosema hapo jana. Ni kongamano ambalo linafanyika baada ya miaka 31 baada ya janga hili la mabadiliko ya tabia nchi kuweza kutangazwa kule katika maeneo ya Rio, na vile vile katika mazungumzo ama makubaliano ambayo yaliweza kufanyika mwaka wa 1997. Basi imekuwa ni miaka 31 tangu miaka hiyo, tangu kutangazwa kwa mabadiliko ya tabia nchi kuwa janga, ndipo Afrika basi imeweza kujumuika kwa umoja kuhakikisha kuwa wanaweza kujadili masuala yao kwa pamoja, na wanapoenda katika makongamano ya Umoja wa Mataifa wanakuwa na usemi mmoja ambapo sasa wataweza kusikizwa vizuri, na iwapo ni kupewa fedha, watapewa fedha ambazo zina maana, fedha ambazo zitaweza kuwasaidia katika miradi mbalimbali. Na vile vile fedha hizi basi wanatumai kuwa zitaweza kuwafikia Wakenya, na vile vile Kenya inatarajia kuwa pesa hizi zitaweza kufikia Wakenya na vile vile mataifa mengine ambayo yameweza kuwasili hapa, na mataifa ya bara Afrika vile vile yanatarajia kuwa yataweza kupata pesa hizo na zitaweza kuwafikia vile vile watu wao katika mataifa hayo. Basi kama nilivyokuwa nimekujuza ni kwa baadhi ya marais ambao wameweza kuwasili katika kongamano hili ni Rais wa Sierra Leone ambaye ni Maada Bio, ambaye aliweza kufika mapema kabisa, Rais wa Tanzania Samia Suluhu, Rais wa Burundi Evariste Ndayishimiye, Rais wa Sudan Kusini Salva Kiir, Rais wa Comoros Azal Assoumani, Rais wa Egypt ambaye ni Abdel Fattah el-Sisi, mjumbe maalum kutoka Marekani ambaye ni John Kerry, kama nilivyokuwa nimekujuza, vile vile alikuwepo hapo jana, na tunatarajia vile vile kuweza kumsikia pia hii leo, kusikiza maoni yake ambayo amekuja nayo kutoka Marekani. Na vile vile tumeweza kumwona Rais wa Mozambique Filipe Nyusi, vile vile aliweza kuwasili. Tumeweza kumwona vile vile Rais wa Rwanda ambaye ni Paul Kagame, Rais wa Ethiopia ambaye ni Zade Wokzud vile vile ameweza kuwasili. Vile vile tumeweza kuona, mtazamaji, Katibu Mkuu wa Umoja wa Mataifa Antonio Guterres yupo katika kongamano hili la kihistoria kabisa la mabadiliko ya tabia nchi, na vile vile mwenyekiti wa Umoja wa Afrika ambaye ni Moussa Faki. Nakumbuka kuwa, mtazamaji, vile vile katika kongamano hili yupo rais wa taifa hili Dr. Samoei William Ruto ambaye atakuwa akiongoza mijadala ambayo itakuwa ikifanyika hii leo. Mjadala mkuu ambao umeweza kuratibiwa ambao utakuwa ukianza ni mjadala unaohusiana na ufadhili wa miradi ya mabadiliko ya tabia nchi. Basi katika wajumbe ambao wanaendelea kuwasili katika kongamano hili, tunaona vile vile yupo mjumbe ama ni rais wa taifa ambaye ameweza kufika hapa. Tutakuwa tunakujuza ni yupi ambaye ameweza kuwasili. Na mtazamaji, kumbuka kuwa vile vile katika kongamano hili limeweza kuhudhuriwa vile vile na mawaziri wote wa taifa hili, ambapo tumemwona waziri wa mazingira Soipan Tuya yupo, Huyo ni rais wa Kongo, mtazamaji, ambaye unaweza kumuona ameweza kuwasili katika kongamano hili maarufu sana la mabadiliko ya tabia nchi, na atakuwa akipokelewa pale. Tayari ashapokelewa na mwenyekiti wa Umoja wa Afrika Musa Faki. Basi anaelekea katika sehemu spesheli ambapo marais wote wa bara Afrika wanapokelewa na rais wa taifa hili Dr. William Ruto, na baada ya hapo basi watakuwa wakielekea katika ukumbi maalum wa Tsavo, ambapo ndipo kongamano hili spesheli kabisa linaendelea ama litakuwa likifanyika. Na mtazamaji, kama unavyoona hapo, basi hapo tu ni baadhi ya mawaziri vilevile wa taifa hili ambao wameweza kuwasili katika kongamano hili, ambapo unamuona waziri wa mazingira Soipan Tuya ameweza kuwasili. Vilevile mtazamaji, mkuu wa mawaziri vilevile ameweza kuwasili. Tuliweza kumwona alifika mapema sana. Na vilevile mtazamaji, hao tu ni baadhi ya wajumbe kutoka bara Afrika ambao wamefika, wana maoni yao ambao watakuwa wakijadili kuhusiana na mambo kadha wa kadha, kuhusiana na ufadhili kama unavyoona hapo. Basi anapokelewa na Rais Dr. William Ruto akimkaribisha kabisa katika kongamano hili spesheli la mabadiliko ya tabia nchi, ambapo mtazamaji, hii leo ni siku ya pili. Basi hapo wanapigwa picha ya kihistoria ambayo itaweza kuhifadhiwa kuweza kuonyesha kuwa hawa aliweza kuwasili katika kongamano hili, na vilevile akaweza kuchangia na kutoa maoni ambayo yataweza kuendeleza bara hili la Afrika. Mtazamaji, kama unavyoona wajumbe wanaendelea kuwasili, na tutaendelea tu kukujuza wanapoendelea kufika, kwani hili ni kongamano ambalo kila mtu katika bara Afrika ameweza kualikwa aweze kufika, aweze kutoa maoni yake, aweze kuchangia, aweze kuwasilisha watu wake kutoka taifa lake. Ni kongamano ambalo mtazamaji, tunatarajia kuwa wataweza kutia sahihi katika mkataba maalum ambao utakuwa ukiitwa the Nairobi Declaration. Mkataba huu mtazamaji, utakuwa ni makubaliano ambayo yatakuwa yametoa sahihi na marais wote wa bara Afrika kukubaliana ni jambo lipi ambalo wanataka liweze kuangaziwa katika makongamano makubwa ambayo yanajumuisha ulimwengu mzima, ili kuweza kujua ni lipi ambalo Afrika itaweza kupata, ikizingatiwa kuwa mtazamaji, bara hili limekumbwa na mambo mengi sana tangu awali. Kumekuwa na majanga ya mafuriko, vimbunga mtazamaji, ambavyo Afrika kwa wakati mwingine haijakuwa na uwezo wa kuvidhibiti, lakini kutokana na kongamano hili tunatarajia kuwa tutaweza kupata fedha za kutosha ambazo zitakuwa zikitumika katika kudhibiti majanga kama haya. Kama unavyoona mtazamaji, hao tu ni baadhi ya wajumbe ambao wanaendelea kuwasili. Huyo ni Musa Faki ambaye ni mwenyekiti wa Umoja wa Afrika, ambaye mtazamaji anaendelea kupokea wajumbe, na vile vile naibu rais Rigathi Gachagua yupo pamoja na Musa Faki tu ambaye ni mwenyekiti wa Umoja wa Afrika, wakiendelea tu kupokea wajumbe ambao wanaendelea. Mtazamaji, sasa tunapoona wote wameweza kuingia ndani, ishara tosha kuwa basi baadhi ya wajumbe ambao walikuwa wanatarajiwa waweze kuwasili basi washawasili, ambao ni marais, wenyekiti wa miungano mikubwa kama vile Umoja wa Mataifa, ambapo tumeona katibu mkuu Antonio Guterres aliweza kuwasili. Hii ni ishara tosha mtazamaji kuwa wote washawasili, na basi wanaelekea ndani, ambapo sasa pindi tu watakapoingia katika ukumbi maalum wa Tsavo, sherehe hizi za leo, makongamano hili la leo litaanza kirasmi, ambapo kama nilivyokuwa nimekujuza kuwa tunatarajia kuweza kuona mazungumzo spesheli kuhusiana na ufadhili wa miradi ya mabadiliko ya tabia nchi. Mtazamaji, tukiweza kuangazia tu masuala ambayo yaliweza kujadiliwa hapo jana, ni kwa tuliweza kuona kuwa Rais William Ruto vile aliweza kugusia masuala kadha wa kadha, akisema kuwa bara la Afrika ni bara ambalo lina ukwasi mwingi mtazamaji, ikilinganishwa kwa masuala ya rasilimali ya kutosha barani Afrika, Lakini rasilimali hizi mtazamaji, tunazitumia kwa njia gani? Rais William Ruto aliweza kuwahimiza wenzake na vilevile wajumbe ambao waliweza kuwa wamefika katika kongamano hili, akiwajuza kuwa ipo haja ya kuweza kuangazia baadhi ya rasilimali hizi, na kuhakikisha kuwa zinaweza kufaidi bara hili la Afrika, ikizingatiwa kuwa mtazamaji, bara hili la Afrika lina madini ya kutosha, madini ambayo yanaweza kuuzwa, yanaweza kunadiwa na Afrika ikaweza kupata pesa za kuweza kudhibiti majanga ambayo yamekuwa yakikumba bara hili. Lakini madini haya yamekuwa yakinadiwa, yakiuzwa kwa mapato ya chini sana, ikawa kuwa basi Afrika haipati pesa za kutosha kuweza kudhibiti majanga ambayo yanakumba taifa hili, bara hili mtazamaji. Kama unavyoona mtazamaji, muda si mchache kongamano hili special litakuwa liking'oa nanga, na tunatarajia kuweza kuona mijadala mbalimbali vile vile ambayo inagusia masuala kama vile ya kaboni, kunadiwa kwa kaboni katika masoko mbalimbali, huku Afrika ikipewa kipaumbele, akisema kuwa Afrika ikiwa ni bara ambalo linatoa gesi kali ya chini ambayo ni 4%, lakini athari ambazo bara hili linakumbwa nalo ni athari kali sana mtazamaji, athari ambazo zimesababisha watu wakaweza kupoteza maisha yao, athari ambazo zimeweza kufanya baadhi ya watu mtazamaji wakakosa chakula. Kumekuwa na ukame katika baadhi ya mataifa ya bara Afrika, na tunatumai kuwa basi katika kongamano hili wataweza kupata suluhu angalau ya jinsi ambavyo wataweza kukabiliana na majanga kama hayo ya ukame, vimbunga, mafuriko mtazamaji. Ikizingatiwa kuwa hapo awali tuliweza kuona kwa utabiri ambao umeweza kutolewa hasa katika ukanda wa Afrika Mashariki, ni kuwa basi katika miezi ifuatayo tunatarajia kuweza kuona mvua za El Nino zinatarajiwa kuweza kuanza kunyesha kuanzia miezi ya Oktoba. Basi El Nino iwapo itakuja kama ilivyotangazwa mtazamaji, itaweza kudhibitiwa kwa njia gani? Basi tunatarajia kuwa katika kongamano hili wataweza kuwa na suluhu ya mambo kama hayo, na vile vile ukiweza kuangazia kuwa kumeweza kuwa pia na utabiri kuwa kutakuwa na nzige ambao wanatarajiwa kuweza kuwa katika mataifa kadha wa kadha kama vile Kenya, Ethiopia, Somalia. Na nzige hawa wakija basi wanakuja na pepo mbalimbali, na pepo hizo zinapovuma wakaweza kuja katika mataifa haya, basi wataweza kuenea katika mataifa mengine, na nzige basi wakiwepo wanaharibu chakula, na kama wanaharibu chakula basi hii inamaanisha kuwa kutaweza kuwa na ukosefu wa chakula cha kutosha. Haya ni baadhi ya masuala ambayo yanatarajiwa kuweza kujadiliwa katika kongamano hili. Ukosefu wa chakula, ukosefu wa mvua, na mvua hizi zinapokuja zinakuwa ni kuwa zinaleta madhara, basi inakuwa kuwa bara hili linashindwa kudhibiti majanga kama haya. Vile vile maswali ambayo watu wengi barani Afrika wanajiuliza ni maswali kuhusiana na jinsi ambavyo pesa hizi zinaweza kufikia watu waliopo mashinani, watu ambao hawajaweza kufika katika kongamano hili, watu ambao ni wakulima tuseme, wataweza kupata fedha hizi kivipi ili kuweza kujidhibiti na majanga kama haya? Basi watu wengi wanatarajia kuwa baada ya kongamano hili wataweza kutembea na kuhudhuria vikao mbalimbali katika nchi mbalimbali, katika vijiji mbalimbali, ili kuweza kuwahamasisha jinsi ambavyo wanaweza kujikinga dhidi ya athari za mabadiliko ya tabia nchi. Mtazamaji, kama nilivyokuwa nimekujuza ni kuwa baadhi ya viongozi ambao wameweza kuwasili katika kongamano hili spesheli la kihistoria ambalo limeweza kufanyika kwa mara ya kwanza kabisa tangu kutangazwa kwa mabadiliko ya tabia ya nchi kuwa janga. Miaka hiyo kufikia sasa ni takriban miaka 31. Janga hili la mabadiliko ya tabia ya nchi liliweza kutangazwa mwaka 1997 huko Rio. Kumeweza kuwa na makubaliano kama ule wa Kyoto, mtazamaji. Na swali ambalo watu wengi wanajiuliza ni kwa nini makubaliano haya ambayo huwa yanakubaliwa katika makongamano haya huwa hayafuatiliwi? Kumeweza kuwa na makubaliano kama lile la Paris. Kwa nini basi baada ya hapo mataifa ambayo huwa yanahudhuria kongamano hizi ama makongamano haya huwa hawafuatilii kuhakikisha kuwa yale ambayo wanaweza kujadili katika makongamano hayo basi yanaweza kutekelezwa katika mataifa yao? Ni mambo yapi ambayo huwa yanachangia ama yanafanya makubaliano hayo yasiweze kutekelezwa katika mataifa? Tunatarajia kwa makubaliano ambayo yataweza kukubaliwa katika kongamano hili ambapo kutaweza kuwa na the Nairobi Declaration, ni makubaliano ambayo mataifa yote yataweza kurudi na kuweza kutekeleza katika mataifa yao. Mtazamaji, masuala mengine ambayo tunatarajia yaweze kuzungumziwa katika kongamano hili ni masuala kuhusiana na kawi safi na nishati mbadala, ikizingatiwa kuwa hapo jana tuliweza kuona kuwa Rais William Ruto aliweza kusema kuwa hapa nchini Kenya tayari tushaanza kutumia kawi safi katika sekta mbalimbali, akisema kuwa kufikia sasa ni 92% ya kawi safi ambayo inatumiwa hapa nchini Kenya. Basi tu akiwahimiza wenzake kutoka mataifa mbalimbali kuhakikisha kuwa vilevile wanaweza kuangazia na kuiga mfano wa Kenya ili vilevile waweze kuwa na kawi safi katika nchi zao ili kuweza kupunguza madhara ama athari za mabadiliko ya tabia nchi. Vilevile masuala ambayo yanajadiliwa katika kongamano hili ama yana mwito ambao umeweza kutolewa ni mwito wa ushirikiano baina ya mataifa mbalimbali. Ushirikiano ambao kama wanavyosema umoja ni nguvu, utangamano ni udhaifu. Mtazamaji, ukiweza kuwa na ushirikiano kama bara Afrika, itaweza kuwa ni jambo la maana kabisa ambalo litatuwezesha kuweza kuwa na usemi mmoja ambao utatuwezesha vilevile kuweza kupata ufadhili. Mtazamaji, wajumbe wanaendelea kuwasili katika ukumbi huu. Vilevile tumeweza kumwona gavana Nairobi ameweza kuwasili, mkuu wa mawaziri vilevile ameweza kuwasili kuhakikisha kuwa kongamano hili linapewa uzito na linafuatiliwa sana na wajumbe wote, hasa hapa nchini Kenya na vilevile katika mataifa yote ya bara Afrika. Kama nilivyokuwa nimekujuza, watakuwa wakijadili masuala ya rasilimali za Afrika, masuala ya kuwekeza katika sekta mbalimbali ambazo zitawafaidi wa Afrika. Huu ni mwamko mpya mtazamaji, mwamko mpya katika bara Afrika. Hili linaonyesha kuwa bara la Afrika limeamka na linataka masuala yake yaweze kujadiliwa na kupewa kipaumbele. Vilevile mtazamaji, izingatiwe kuwa vilevile wapo vijana ambao wameweza kuwasili katika kongamano hili na waliweza kuwa na makubaliano yao hapo awali. Makubaliano yao hapo awali mtazamaji, kama unavyoona hapa kwenye runinga yako, naibu rais vilevile amewasili. Marais ndao mtazamaji wameanza kuwasili katika jumba maalum la kikao hiki spesheli la kihistoria na mabadiliko ya tabia nchi. Naona marais hao wameanza kuingia hapa katika jumba la Tsavo ambapo tupo. Walinzi wao wanaingia, mtazamaji. Walinzi wanaingia wakifuatiwa na marais. Hii ni ishara tosha, mtazamaji, kwa kongamano hili la hii leo ambapo ni siku ya pili. Liliweza kuanza kirasmi hapo jana tarehe 4 mwezi Septemba, leo tarehe 5 siku ya pili, na linatarajiwa kuweza kuendelea hadi hapo kesho tarehe 6. Kama unavyoona kwenye runinga yako mtazamaji, huyo ni katibu mkuu wa Umoja wa Mataifa Antonio Guterres. Anaweza kuwasili hapa katika jumba la Tsavo ambapo ni sehemu ambapo vikao vyote vitaweza kufanyika. Basi sasa mtazamaji, hao ni marais ambao wanaweza kuingia, marais ambao nilikuwa nimekutajia hapo awali. Rais wa Misri wa Egypt Abdel Fattah el-Sisi, Kagame wa Rwanda Paul Kagame, marais wengi tu. Tumemwona wa Sierra Leone Madabi, wa Tanzania Samia Suluhu, Evariste Ndayishimiye wa Burundi, Salva Kiir wa Sudan Kusini, Azali Assoumani wa Comoros, Philippe Nyusi wa Mozambique, Zade Wokzud wa Ethiopia, Rais William Ruto vile namwona shawasili. Mtazamaji, ni ishara tosha kabisa kwa kongamano hili linaenda kuanza muda si mchache. Kama nilivyokuwa nimekujuza mtazamaji, ni mwamko mpya katika bara la Afrika. Afrika iko tayari kuweza kujadili masuala yake na kupata suluhu ya masuala mbalimbali ambayo yamekuwa yakiathiri bara hili la Afrika. Ukumbi huu wa Tsavo mtazamaji, Salva Kiir kama unavyomwona ameweza kuwasili, ambaye ni rais wa Sudan Kusini. Hali ndo kama hiyo mtazamaji, hapa katika ukumbi wa Tsavo. Marais kutoka mataifa mbalimbali ya bara Afrika wameweza kuwasili. Katibu mkuu wa Umoja wa Mataifa Antonio Guterres ameweza kuwasili. Mwenyekiti wa Umoja wa Afrika Moussa Faki ameweza kuwasili. Tunaona vile viongozi wa Kenya, tamwona mama wa taifa Rachel Ruto na mwenzake hapo kando wa naibu wa rais, mke wa naibu wa rais Dorcas Gachagua. Basi mtazamaji, kongamano hili linaanza spesheli kwa sasa. Tuweze kusikiza mtazamaji.
Your Excellencies, and all distinguished guests. To start us forth this morning, we have a Kikwetu production, a fusion of Samburu, Turkana, Borana, and Maasai communities performing with contemporary dancers and acrobats, giving you a taste of the diverse and rich Kenyan culture. Sit back, relax.
Your Excellencies, Honorable Ministers, distinguished guests, good morning and welcome to the Africa Climate Summit. We heard from His Excellency President Ruto yesterday, where he so eloquently presented Africa's case for fairness, justice, and equity in helping the continent pursue its climate action efforts. If I may, I would like to emphasize His Excellency's points, which simply is this: Africa needs reform of the global financial to fund its climate
Financement.
business as usual will not cut it. I'll reiterate that. His Excellency's points was this: Africa needs reform of the global financial architecture to fund its climate action goals. Business as usual is not going to cut it. Of Albert Einstein's definition of insanity. And I quote, "Insanity is doing the same thing over and over and over and expecting different results. We need to do something different."
We absolutely do. Thank you so much for that, Zain. And this is powerful. Africa called, and the world has come. His Excellency, you want us to give the leadership, the people, all the different organizations in this room a round of applause for coming together to do this. This is a moment. Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, yesterday some powerful themes came through. Two quotes in particular from the young delegates stayed with me. They said, "Our countries will be burning and drowning, and you will not be there to save us." You know, it occurred to me that countries are drowning and burning today. So if we don't do something now, what will our children and generations to come experience? The other thing they said was, "We have to trust you, and you must trust us." And I thought such wisdom, grace, hope, and responsibility captured in one simple statement. And so, ladies and gentlemen, we must call to the world from Nairobi today and make it clear that it is past time to address the tough issues. It is past time to hold the difficult but much needed conversations on Africa, risk, perception, reality, resources, policies, regulations, systems. And it's past time for these conversations to be guided by equity. That is what we need.
And Africa has the resources and assets, including mineral and energy resources, agricultural capacity, and natural capital to promote the global decarbonization agenda. But to realize this potential, the world needs to do its own part in helping steer Africa on the pathway to an inclusive, sustainable, and progressive future. At the fundamental level, that will require decoupling economic growth from environmental degradation. In the words of the late Wangari Maathai, an icon of Kenya and a Nobel Peace Laureate, and I quote, "We are very fond of blaming the poor for destroying the environment, but often it is the powerful, including governments, that are responsible," end quote. In other words, we are all in this together. It will require our combined efforts to overcome this challenge. The spirit of Harambe, as we say in Kiswahili.
And that means for those of you who don't know, let's all pull together, let's work together for a common goal and purpose. Zain, thank you for reminding us. We have icons, we have role models all over the continent doing incredible things. Thank you so much. We also have a young, innovative workforce. There's so much potential. So our call is, let's pull together. Thank you for coming. Thank you for ensuring you listen and are present and will act around a climate agenda determined by the African continent. An agenda that is going to safeguard our people, our communities, livelihoods on the continent, our economies, and ultimately, ladies and gentlemen, when we safeguard Africa, we safeguard the world. Can we give that a round of applause, please? Please. Safeguarding Africa is safeguarding the world.
Now, to help guide us on this journey with an incredible lineup of speakers, please give a very warm welcome to the Honorable Soipan Tuya, Cabinet Secretary, Environment, Climate Change and Forestry for the Government of Kenya. Mheshimiwa.
Thank you.
Excellency, President William Ruto, our host president, all our visiting heads of state here with us today, all distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. History documents that Africa, and Kenya in particular, is the cradle of mankind. It is my hope and prayer that out of the cradle of mankind comes the all-time elusive solution to combating climate change. African-led solutions to decarbonize and steer a low-carbon development pathway for the globe. We are gathered here today to make history as the continent of Africa. The world is facing many challenges, but none has become so apparent, so threatening, and so devastating as the threat of climate change. And we can only respond by making history at this inaugural Africa Climate Summit. Everywhere we look in Africa, there is a climate change related story to tell. For example, in Malawi, Hurricane Freddy led to the loss of 200 people and nearly $2 billion US dollars worth of damage occasioned. Last year, the Horn of Africa came out of one of the worst droughts in decades, where we lost hundreds of lives and thousands of livestock. In fact, for the first time in Kenya, we had to track water for our wildlife in the national parks and reserves. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, although African countries are making every available effort to deal with the vagaries of climate change, our economies are continuing to be weighed down by mounting debts. As we speak, 31 out of the 37 heavily indebted poor countries in the world are in Africa. Over 20 years of climate change negotiations have yielded agreements and promises that have delivered very little for Africa. Instead, the imagery of Africa as a poor continent, a victim, keep dominating the climate negotiations year in, year out. The fact that Africa has historically contributed very little to the global emissions has remained an inconvenient truth, yet receiving no reciprocity from the rest of the world for the contribution we make. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, this inaugural Africa Climate Summit presents an opportunity like no other for Africa to change the course of history. Millions of young Africans are looking up to African leaders here to leave them with a promise, a visible promise, to make them feel that there is a future where they have hope to get green jobs, live a dignified life, and thrive. We are looking to the summit to chart a green growth pathway for the African continent, set the stage for Africa to lead the globe towards a more ecologically responsible global industrialization, catalyzed by financing that is accessible, adequate, and affordable. The world is waiting for something anew out of this week. We must not be held hostage to the past, but allow ourselves to reimagine a future where, as Africa, we lift ourselves from the fatigue of despair and make history. Excellencies, I am persuaded that the time is now, and I beseech us to respond to this historical call by proposing radical solutions to the world that will help us deal with the climate change. I invite us to listen to the inner urge calling us to serve humanity, that we go down in history, that it is out of Africa, the cradle of mankind, that the solution for climate change came forth. Excellencies, allow me now to invite, to kick us off, the President of the African Development Bank, who has been in the middle of this discourse and supporting a lot of support to the cause. Welcome, Dr. Adesina Akiwumi.
Thank you very much, Cabinet Secretary. Your Excellency, William Ruto, President of Kenya, and our gracious host, and my dear brother. Your Excellency, Azali Assoumani, President of Comoros and Chairperson of the African Union. Your Excellencies, Heads of State and Government, Your Excellencies, the First Ladies, Your Excellency Moussa Faki, Chairperson of the African Union Commission, Your Excellency Antonio Guterres, Secretary General of the United Nations. We are also joined today by Your Excellency Ban Ki-moon, former Secretary General of the United Nations, Your Excellency Ursula von der Leyen, President of the European Commission, Your Excellency Mustafa Madhoudi, Prime Minister of Egypt, Your Excellency Sultan Al-Jaber, COP28 President-designate, honorable ministers, ambassadors, heads of diplomatic missions, the amazing youth and women of Africa. Single ladies and gentlemen, good morning, everyone. Habari za asubuhi. I think I got it right somehow. I wish to commend you, Your Excellency President Ruto, for your excellent leadership in convening this Africa Climate Summit, and for your dynamic and passionate leadership in spearheading Africa's first climate summit. Thank you very much, Mr. President. Thank you for hosting us all in this beautiful nature-blessed country of Kenya. The African Development Bank is pleased to be a major sponsor of the Africa Climate Summit. The presence in such large numbers of Your Excellencies, heads of state and government, ministers and development partners from around the world says it all. Africa's voice on climate change will resonate across the world. The Africa Climate Summit will shape the future pathway of Africa's development. We gather because the people of Africa expect us to act. We gather because the future of the youth of Africa is at stake. We gather because we must galvanize global actions on climate. We gather because our collective existence is at risk. Climate change is short-changing Africa. Droughts and floods have been increasing across the continent. No country is spared. As we gather today, if we strain our ears enough, we will hear the calls of urgency from farmers whose crops and livestock are being destroyed, the voices of fishing folks whose catch is reducing and livelihoods are being imperiled, the voices of the young whose future is being compromised, the voices of women and children who bear the brunt of climate change, the voices of economies unable to cope with the ever-rising costs of climate-induced risks. We have a duty and responsibility to hear these voices and to act with a greater sense of urgency. And responding requires action at three levels. At the global level, the developed economies must meet their commitment to provide $100 billion annually in climate finance. The global climate financial architecture must be changed to prioritize the needs of Africa. At the national level, we must accelerate actions on climate adaptation. And that is why the African Development Bank has committed to providing $25 billion towards climate finance by 2025. We have also launched the African Adaptation Acceleration Program, together with the Global Center on Adaptation, the largest climate adaptation program in the world. Africa must develop with what it has, not what it does not have. Africa is blessed with large sources of renewable energy in the world, renewables from solar, hydro, wind, and geothermal. But we cannot power Africa with potential. We must fully unlock Africa's renewable energy potential. That's why the African Development Bank is implementing $20 billion Desert to Power program to harness the power of solar and deliver electricity for 250 million people. We must power every home, every school, every hospital, and provide stable, affordable, and reliable power. But we must, Your Excellencies, be pragmatic. Africa must use its natural gas and combine it with renewable resources. The International Energy Agency's analysis shows that doing so would only add 0.5% to global emissions. Give us space to grow. We must ensure that Africa's food and agricultural systems are climate resilient. The African Development Bank's flagship program, Technologies for African Agricultural Transformation, has provided 12 million farmers in 21 countries with climate-resilient agricultural technologies. In Ethiopia, climate-resilient wheat varieties supported by the bank has helped it to become self-sufficient in wheat in just 3 years. We are acting at scale to feed Africa with climate resilience. Under the leadership of President Macky Sall, as the then chairperson of the African Union, and the strong leadership of you, our heads of state and government, we succeeded with the Feed Africa Summit held in Dakar in January. We developed food and agriculture delivery compacts for African countries. We have mobilized, Your Excellency Presidents, heads of state and government, globally, $72 billion to support African countries to implement these food and agricultural delivery compacts, and to assure food security and food sovereignty within 5 years, and doing so with climate-resilient agricultural systems. I wish to recognize all development partners from around the world and the African Union Commission who work so tirelessly with us to make this happen. Thank you very much. We will repeat this at the Africa Climate Summit with the development of climate change adaptation investment compacts to help channel financing to national climate adaptation action at scale. We must ensure that resources mobilized do not stay simply in government offices, but reach and protect the lives of people in our villages, in our towns, and in our cities. All lives must be protected from climate change. We must put the youth and women at the core of climate financing. That's why the African Development Bank and the Global Center on Adaptation are announcing here today the launch of a $1 billion facility for Youth Adapt program that will accelerate access to financing for the youth to tackle climate change. The youth are not just the future of Africa, the youth are the present of Africa. The African Development Bank is also rolling out the establishment of youth entrepreneurship investment banks, new financial institutions that will support and grow the businesses of the youth all across Africa. Finally, we must revalue, Your Excellencies, the wealth of Africa by accounting for the proper valuation of its abundant natural resources, including its vast forests that sequester carbon. Few may know that the Congo Forest Basin is the world's largest carbon lungs, larger than the Amazon forest. Yet, Africa's rich nature wealth and the global value of its carbon it sequesters for the world are not accounted for in the estimation of its GDP. It is not enough to praise Africa for its rich natural capital. Its GDP must take that into consideration. Africa's GDP must therefore be revalued based on its carbon sequestration and biodiversity, which provide global public goods. If this is done, the debt to adjusted GDP ratio of several African countries much lower, and they will have greater headroom to borrow more financing to support their development, including investing in the greening of their economies. We must, Your Excellencies, therefore, turn Africa's economies green, not because others ask us to do so, but because it is in our interest to do so. Africa must develop its own carbon market, properly price its carbon, and turn its vast carbon sinks into new sources of enormous wealth. Africa cannot be nature rich and cash poor. As we look towards COP28, Africa needs must be front and center, powered by the leadership of our heads of state and government, our youth and the private sector, and the voices of our communities. We must be the vuvuzelas of climate financing for Africa. Together with partners from around the world, let's make it happen for Africa. Thank you very much. Merci beaucoup. Gracias. Shukran. Asante sana.
Excellencies, our next speaker is His Excellency Musa Faki Mahamat, the chairperson of the African Union Commission. Welcome, Your Excellency. A formidable global reputation of peacekeeping.
Excellency Dr. William Ruto, President of the Republic of Kenya, Excellency Azalia Soumani, President of the Union of the Comoros and current Chairman of the African Union, Excellencies, Head of State, Government, and Delegation, Excellency Antonio Guterres, United Nations Secretary General, Excellency Ursula von der Leyen, President of the European Union Commission, representatives of international organizations, financial institutions, civil society, youth, women, honorable ministers, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, all protocol observed. First and foremost, I would like to thank President William Ruto, the government and the people of Kenya for the exceptional hospitality accorded to us since our arrival in this hospitable and green capital, Nairobi. The beautiful and natural environment in this country augurs well for the great success of our climate summit. The organization of this climate summit in such friendly conditions in just 6 months, thanks to the decision of the African Union Summit last February, is striking proof of the excellence of your leadership, dear friend William. I sincerely congratulate you. Excellences, Mesdames et Messieurs, le récent rapport
The recent report of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, IPCC, confirms our fears. Africa is warming faster than the rest of the world. If this phenomenon is not stopped, climate change will continue to have a serious negative impact on the growth of the African economies. Agricultural productivity has been reduced by 34% between 1961, since 1961, due to climate change more than any other region. Hence, it will have an unbearable pressure on the food systems in Africa. African countries thus face disproportionate burdens and risks arising from unpredictable weather patterns, particularly prolonged droughts and devastating floods at all levels. Massive humanitarian crises provoke detrimental impacts on economies, health, education, peace and security, and other related risks. For example, the season 2022-2023, about 18 million people have been affected by drought in the Horn of Africa alone. Recently, Tropical Cyclone Fred has affected more than 1.2 million of people and caused the death of more than 700 people. It is also estimated that between 2019 and 2023, the economic loss as a result of disasters in Africa is between 20 and 35.5 billion American dollars. This gloomy list is not exhaustive. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, climate change has spared no sector. It is to be recalled that Africa has around 400 million who do not have access to clean drinking water, and about 700 million do not have access to a very good sanitation. And this also indicates, experts indicate that there is a gap, a financing gap of 11 to 20 billion dollars. So we are obviously on the verge of seeing climate degradation. It is not the only factor, and it would be wrong not to integrate this in our global analysis of the negative factors, including governance, which is at the very center. I do not want to yield to pessimism. And in the general, it is how fortunate that in the table we have some beacons and favorable indicators. I cannot help reminding that 600 million people do not have access to electricity, and 200 million of them do not have access to clean cooking and are exposed to all respiratory problems and diseases due to smoke. And because of climate change, we have problems in our infrastructure, and we need to develop profitable infrastructure and spend at least $160 billion per year. Indeed, it is encouraging to note that the African governments have devoted about 3.5% of their GDP to the development of infrastructure over the past 20 years. It is too little compared to some emerging countries. China and India, for example, devote 7.7 and 5.2% of their GDP, respectively, in infrastructure. We can thus see in which direction efforts have to be made. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, this summit affords us an excellent opportunity to translate the climate ambitions of Africa into investment opportunities, to consolidate our voices on matters on burning issues of climate change, to prepare for the UN Climate Summit and for COP28 in the United Arab Emirates. At these meetings of global importance, Africa must, among other challenges, highlight the worrying and sometimes tragic situation in the Sahel, in the Horn of Africa, where drought and floods alternate. In the Congo River Basin, with dangerous deforestation and the disastrous consequences of cyclones in southern Africa and in the island states, it is urgent that Africa come to all these meetings with concrete proposals to be implemented without delay. I strongly reiterate my call to come to the next two meetings with precise proposals without drowning them in literature and the usual litany on the imperative need for collective justice for Africa, where responsibility is very limited in the pollution of a world with an inversely proportional share of the volume of global investment in the field of environment. This call for a restoration of justice for Africa would benefit from being supported by a real reform of the global financial architecture for which a high-level panel is rightly devoted at this summit. Obviously, this reform must resolutely focus on the financial organs and structures, institutions which structure the universe, which operate far from Africa. In this desired reform, a question comes to mind: the weight of the debt and the financing gap of the SDGs. Africa alone represented a need of $1.3 billion per year for sustainable development needs by 2030, while the financing needs for SDGs in the same period were $2.5 billion for financing developing countries. Everyone knows that the public debt stock in sub-Saharan Africa at the end of 2023 was estimated at $1.1 trillion out of 650 billion SDRs mobilized. Africa received only 33 billion, which is only 4.5%. In view of these staggering figures and many others, it is clear that there is no relevant global intervention in favor of Africa without a credible solution for the crippling debt challenge of Africa. To aid the struggle, which include financing adaptation, $100 billion per year, Africa has galvanized its will in its common position through a momentum unifying African voices and it will be central point of our agenda in G20 as soon as we join it. However, in this struggle, Africa cannot just be satisfied with incantation. Just like for its independence, it is a challenge to rely on its own personal efforts, on its own genius, the quality and its virtues of bold, imaginative, united and interdependent leadership. I wish you full success to our deliberations. I thank you very much. Asante sana.
Excellencies, we are overwhelmed by the support that we have received for the summit, and we want to listen to each and every one of us. So I would like to plead with Your Excellencies that we stick to the agreed 5 minutes so that we can have everybody speaking to this. Next, Excellencies, out of COP27 in Egypt was the establishment of a loss and damage fund and the finalization of the details to implement the Santiago network. It was also the first time food security was recognized in the COP conversations. The Arab Republic of Egypt was the COP27 presidency, and it is my honor now to invite His Excellency Mustafa Madbouli, the Prime Minister of Egypt. Welcome, Your Excellency.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. فخامة الرئيس ويليام روتو رئيس جمهورية كينيا.
Président du Kenya, distingués invités, distingués présidents, mesdames et messieurs, je veux tout d'abord
تحيات فخامة الرئيس عبد الفتاح السيسي
Fattah el-Sisi, président de la République arabe d'Égypte. Il m'est un grand privilège de participer au nom de l'Égypte à cette réunion de haut niveau.
خالص التهنئة والشكر
Je félicite
لفخامة الرئيس روتو
Son
ودولته
Excellence
الشقيقة على استضافة الاجتماع، لا سيما وإنه يأتي بعد أشهر
cette
قليلة من
réunion
نجاح مصر
qui survient
وقارتنا
après
الأفريقية
le
باستضافة
succès
أكبر
de
مؤتمر
la
للأمم
réunion
المتحدة
de
لتغير
la
المناخ،
COP
بل وفي تاريخ العمل
27.
متعدد الأطراف حتى الآن. السيدات والسادة
Mesdames et
الحضور،
messieurs,
تأتي قمتنا
ce
اليوم
sommet
في الوقت الذي
d'aujourd'hui
يشهد
survient
فيه
à un
عالمنا
moment critique de
ومصر
notre monde et en particulier le continent africain qui témoigne la
التغيرات المناخية، من موجات جفاف بالقرن الأفريقي ومنطقة الساحل إلى حرائق غابات بالمغرب العربي، ومن أعاصير قاتلة بالجنوب الأفريقي إلى زيادة في درجات حرارة المحيطات وارتفاع سطح البحر بشواطئ مصر والدول الأفريقية المتوسطية، وكلها تؤثر بصورة مباشرة في استدامة المعيشة وتمثل ضغوطا جديدة ومتزايدة على مجتمعاتنا وعلى بلداننا الأفريقية. ولذلك فإن مصر ومن منطلق التزامها بالمساهمة الفعالة في الجهد الدولي لمواجهة والتعامل مع التغيرات المناخية عملت بشكل حثيث على الخروج بنتائج ملموسة في مؤتمر شرم الشيخ تسهم في الانتقال إلى مرحلة التنفيذ الفعلية عبر تسريع وتيرة تنفيذ الإجراءات والمشروعات على أرض الواقع، وتتعامل مع مطالب الدول النامية بتحقيق العدالة المناخية وتعزيز الجهد الدولي للتحول العادل والسريع للاقتصاد منخفض الانبعاثات والقادر على التعامل مع آثار تغير المناخ. وحرصت مصر كرئيس للمؤتمر على أن تكون شرم الشيخ محطة هامة لتسليط الضوء على خصوصية الاحتياجات والظروف الأفريقية في سياق الاستجابة للخطر الوجودي لتغير المناخ. وفي ذات السياق يأتي مؤتمرنا اليوم يؤكد التزام قارتنا الأفريقية بتحقيق التحول العادل للاقتصاد الأخضر، ويدعم المطالب المشروعة بالحصول على نصيب عادل من الدعم المالي والتقني ومن تدفقات الاستثمارات الدولية، بما يسمح بالاستفادة من الإمكانيات الهائلة والموارد المتميزة في قارتنا، ليس فقط لتمويل مشروعات خفض الانبعاثات ولكن أيضا لمشروعات التكيف وبناء القدرة على الصمود، وبالإضافة إلى توفير دعم الدول النامية لمواجهة الخسائر والأضرار المرتبطة بالمناخ. وأؤكد في هذا الصدد على الدور الهام والمحوري الذي تقوم به لجنة رؤساء الدول والحكومات الأفريقية ومجلس وزراء البيئة الأفارقة ومجموعة المفوضين الأفارقة في تسليط الضوء على أولوياتنا في مواجهة تغير المناخ وتبعاته. السيدات والسادة، يقع محور التوسع في الطاقة النظيفة ومصادر الطاقة الجديدة والمتجددة في قلب النموذج التنموي الجديد، وهو ما رحبت به دول القارة وترجمته في تعهداتها الوطنية بالتوسع في الطاقة المتجددة. وتحفل قارتنا بالأمثلة المبشرة والملهمة، بما في ذلك مصر التي وصلت لنحو 20% من إنتاج الطاقة من المصادر المتجددة، ساعية إلى الوصول إلى 42% بحلول عام 2030. وفي هذا الإطار أود الإشادة بالرؤية التي طرحتها الرئاسة الإماراتية لمؤتمر كوب 28 من خلال معالي الدكتور سلطان الجابر حول مستقبل الانتقال للطاقة وسيكون لها دور بالتأكيد في إنجاح مخرجات مؤتمر كوب 28 وتلبيته لتوقعات أفريقيا والعالم النامي. السادة الحضور، يظل النفاذ للتمويل هو عنق الزجاجة الذي يواجه أفريقيا والدول النامية من أجل تحويل خططها وأحلامها إلى واقع معاش يسهم في معالجة الأزمة المناخية، وفي نفس الوقت لا يمس بمسيرتها التنموية أو يثقل من ديونها. ويمثل اجتماعنا هذا فرصة ممتازة لتناول موضوعات تمويل المناخ، وتتمحور رؤية مصر في هذا الصدد حول العناصر التالية. أولاً، ضرورة إعادة النظر في أدوات التمويل المتاحة حالياً والتحول إلى التمويل الميسر والمنح لتسريع وتيرة التحول المطلوب. ثانياً، أهمية مراجعة معايير تدفق الاستثمارات لضمان حصول القارة الأفريقية على نصيبها العادل من التمويل. ثالثاً، التأكيد على أن تمويل المناخ وهو تمويل جديد وإضافي وليس سحبا من مخصصات الدعم التنموي. رابعا، ضرورة العمل على تفعيل آلية واحدة وفعالة ومناسبة لإعادة استخدام الديون الحالية من خلال آلية فعالة لتحويل الديون إلى تمويل المناخ. وفي هذا السياق نتطلع لأن يمثل مؤتمر دبي المقبل اختراقا في تنفيذ تعهد الدول المتقدمة بتوفير 100 مليار دولار سنويا لتمويل المناخ الذي لم يتم إدراكه رغم كونه ليس أكثر من التزام رمزي بالمسؤولية التاريخية المشتركة ومتباينة الأعباء. ختاما، فإنني أود إعادة التأكيد على أن طبيعة قضية تغير المناخ والتعامل معها لا يكون إلا من خلال منظور تعاوني قائم على تعزيز النظام متعدد الأطراف يؤسس على الإنصاف والعدالة ومراعاة الظروف الوطنية للدول. وأنتهز هذه الفرصة للثناء على ما طرحته جمهورية كينيا الشقيقة من عناصر ورؤية لصياغة نقاشاتنا في الأيام القادمة، ولأجدد التأكيد على دعم جمهورية مصر العربية الكامل بصفتها الوطنية وكرئيس للدورة الحالية لمؤتمر الأمم المتحدة للمناخ للنسخة المقبلة بدبي تحت رئاستها الإماراتية، التي نثق تماما في قدرتها والتزامها بالبناء على نتائج شرم الشيخ وإدراك المزيد من النتائج الإيجابية. وشكرا لحضراتكم.
Your Excellency, Excellencies, Africa is Europe's closest neighbor and our sister continent. Our geopolitics therefore concern each other. Europe and Africa have close economic, cultural, and geographical ties. To speak for the European Commission, I would now take this opportunity to invite Her Excellency Ursula von der Leyen, the European Union President. Welcome, Your Excellency.
Thank you very much, dear President Ruto, for hosting this Africa Climate Summit. And thank you very much for your leadership on climate action ever since you took office. I very much welcome Kenya's Climate Change Act 2023 that was launched during this summit and that puts strong emphasis on carbon markets. We fully support you on this important topic. Presidents, prime ministers, fellow leaders, excellencies, I want to greet my colleague Moussa Faki, Chairman of the African Union. I want to greet the President Assoumani from the Comoros. I want to greet Secretary General Antonio Guterres, Dr. Sultan Al Jaber, President of the COP28, my fellow leaders, ladies and gentlemen. I am deeply honored to participate in this discussion. This summit is a crucial step to prepare the upcoming COP28 meeting and to make sure that Africa's voice resonates around the world and that Africa's priorities as a continent that is most affected by climate change are duly taken on board. Today, I'm here not only to listen to you, but also to bring Europe's offer to be your ally at COP28 and to work together on all issues on the agenda. Because however different our two continents may look, we share the same interests when it comes to climate action. We hear you, President Ruto, and dear friends, when you say that Africa's first priority is to grow your economy, yes, and lift as many people as possible out of poverty. Yes, you're so right. Climate action is part of the solution. You are part of the solution. with your huge potential for renewable energy and clean hydrogen, your critical raw materials, your incredible nature and biodiversity, and your young workforce. You can help clean up global energy systems and supply chains while creating good jobs here and economic opportunities yet that your people demand, rightly so. This is a win-win partnership which benefits Africa and the world. For instance, the benefits of expanding Africa's clean energy sector would be massive. By speeding up the transition to solar and wind power, energy sector jobs in Africa could double in a few years. And Africa could produce enough clean energy not only to power up your continent, but also to export abroad. Climate action can be one of the main drivers of Africa's growth. But for this, Africa needs massive investment. And Europe wants to be your partner, in closing this investment gap. First of all, we fully support the need for multilateral development bank reform. It is time to move from words to action, absolutely. Secondly, investment has to come. And this is why 150 billion euro in our investment plan are designated for Africa. We call it Global Gateway. They are aimed at the African continent. Global Gateway supports investments ranging from hydropower plants in the DRC, Burundi, Rwanda, and Tanzania, to the 1 billion euro initiative on climate adaptation and resilience in Africa, which we announced at COP27. And Global Gateway is unique in the global investment landscape. We're not only interested in extracting resources. We want to partner with you to create local value chains, to create good jobs here in Africa. We want to share European technology with you. We want to invest in skills for local workers. This is crucial for the young people, because the stronger you are as suppliers, the more Europe will diversify supply chains towards Africa, and the more we both will de-risk our economies. It's a clear win-win. Namibia, for instance, is now building a new hydrogen industry, as well as rare materials value chains in partnership with Europe. And later this morning, President Ruto and I will conclude a new hydrogen partnership between Kenya and the European Union, with the objective to further develop the green hydrogen economy and with the full support of Team Europe. This is good news for Africa and for Europe alike. So we should work very closely as partners. Yet, public money from major economies, however crucial, is not enough. And this is why we need to bring the conversation on climate financing to the global stage at COP28. Let me briefly share 3 specific points that will be discussed here in Nairobi. To pave the way towards COP28. First, on attracting private investment to Africa. Second, on carbon pricing and carbon credits. And third, on setting global targets for the energy transition. On the first point, the green transition will require an unprecedented scale of private investment. Public finance will not suffice. This is true for Europe, but it is also true for emerging market and developing economies. Private capital will need to be mobilized at scale. And here, green bonds are widely recognized as providing part of the solution. This is why we just put forward a new proposal to attract private investment. It's called Global Green Bonds Initiative. We know that emerging economies can face hurdles to access capital markets, but we can change that together. Europe has the biggest and most advanced green bond market in the world, so we are ready to share our expertise with your teams on how to develop your own green bond markets. And at the same time, we will push on the investor side. Together with the European Investment Bank and our member states, we are allocating 1 billion euros to de-risk private investments in emerging markets. This could help to attract up to 20 billion euros in sustainable investment. So let's work together on that to build and grow Africa's green bond markets, and let us bring together this crucial point to COP28. There's another solution that would unlock huge resources for climate action in Africa, and that is carbon pricing and true carbon credits. And this is my second point. I believe, as you do, President Ruto, that setting a price on carbon emissions is one of the most efficient and one of the most effective tools in our hands, because it fosters innovation by the private sector, that's crucial, because it makes heavy polluters pay a fair price, that is necessary, and because it creates revenues that can support the clean transition in developing countries. That's what we need. And this includes also to include the carbon sinks that have been mentioned, and you are rich in carbon sinks here, and to reward this contribution. We have to get there. We will discuss this in more detail in the next session, so let us work together to bring a proposal for global carbon pricing and true carbon credits at COP28. And finally, on global energy goals, if we are to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees, we have to speed up the global energy transition. That means if we want to match our goals, we need to triple renewable energy capacity, and we need to double energy efficiency by 2030. This sounds bold, but it is doable. If we step up global investment in renewables, this would make clean energy more affordable for all countries, including here in Africa. And this is why COP28 President Dr. Sultan Al-Jaber and I champion an initiative for global targets for the energy transition to be achieved collectively. Because only what gets measured gets done. So the global goals will provide a benchmark to track the progress and to attract even more private investment. So I look forward to working with you on this and much, much more. I hope that Africa and Europe will join forces to reach a global agreement at COP28. Ladies and gentlemen, these three proposals may look bold. They may look impossible to achieve. But in the beautiful words of Nelson Mandela, who said, "It always seems impossible until it's done." We have a huge responsibility to fight climate change for the good of our children, for the good of our grandchildren. And I wrote down these beautiful words of the African youth yesterday. Our countries are burning and drowning. As you're not here to save us, we have to trust you now. So, my friends, let's reward the trust of these young people and show responsibility. Let's join forces for COP28. Many thanks. I feel so honored for being invited. Thank you.
you very much, Your Excellency. Excellencies, the Nairobi African Leaders Declaration on Climate Change and Call to Action, which we hope that we will get from you, Excellencies, tomorrow, will take a tour of the United Nations Secretary General Summit, then eventually to the UAE for COP28. What better way to start preparing the way for the declaration than by having the COP28 President-designate, Dr. Sultan Al-Jaber, the COP28 President-designate, to address this summit. Dr. Al-Jaber is the Minister of Industry and Advanced Technology of the United Arab Emirates. Welcome, Your Excellency.
Your Excellency, President Ruto, Secretary General Guterres, Your Excellencies, heads of states, Your Excellencies, heads of governments, Excellencies, distinguished ministers, honored guests, colleagues, dear friends. It is indeed my pleasure to be back here in Nairobi and to have the opportunity to share with you my thoughts at this inaugural Africa Climate Summit, where Africa is evidently championing a new vision for climate action. We're gathering here in Nairobi just 3 days before the UNFCCC releases the findings of the first global stocktake. And let's just face it, we already know that the world is way off track, and we know what this report will actually say and what it will conclude. The world is losing the race to secure the goals of the Paris Agreement. And the world is struggling to keep 1.5 within reach. Collectively, we must admit that we are not delivering the results we need in the time we need them. We must also accept that business as usual is simply not working, and that business as usual will not allow for a paradigm shift. We need a smart, pragmatic disruption. We need an integrated approach that delivers transformational progress. And we need a plan that leaves no one behind. That is why I have been and I continue on calling on all parties to unite around a plan of action that is fully inclusive, a plan of action that fast-tracks a just, responsible, orderly, and well-managed energy transition, a plan that will focus on people, lives, and livelihoods, and a plan will finally fix climate finance. Ladies and gentlemen, Africa contributes just 3% of global emissions. Yet, we all know that it suffers some of the worst consequences. Droughts, floods, and failed harvests have exposed 1/5 of Africa's people to hunger, tripled the number of people displaced in the last 3 years, and is dragging down Africa's GDP growth by at least 5% every year. But there is also another narrative that unfortunately is overlooked and in a big way undermined and underestimated that needs to get out there. and that is Africa is also a beacon of hope, filled with potential and a global example of what pro-climate and nature-positive development should and must look like. Ethiopia's Green Legacy Initiative is enhancing food security and stimulating green jobs across the Horn of Africa. The countries of the Congo Basin are protecting vital rainforests and helping preserve the world's natural carbon sinks. Kenya is closing on its goal of 100% clean energy by 2030. And the number of sub-Saharan countries in Africa with significant installed solar power has grown 6 times in the last 5 years. This great continent is rich in the resources that can help not just Africa, but the entire world transition to a zero carbon and high growth future. That said, we first need to deal with some realities, and we must accept to come to terms with these facts. Almost half of Africa's population still have no access to electricity. Almost 1 billion people lack clean cooking fuels, and this energy gap will only increase as Africa's population grows. These basic energy needs must be met, and meeting them with low carbon, nature positive solutions will meet Africa's development and climate goals at the same time. And the key to making this happen is, of course, finance and finance and finance. This finance must be made available. This must be made accessible, and this finance must be made affordable. According to the African Development Bank, 250 billion US dollars annually is required to meet Africa's climate finance needs. Africa only receives 12% of that amount, and less than 2% of that is going to adaptation. We can all agree that this is neither just or equitable. We must agree that it is a big missed opportunity. The World Bank estimates that every dollar spent on climate adaptation brings an average of $4 in benefits. It simply makes sense for Africa to get a fairer share of global climate finance. That is why I am calling on donor countries to close out the $100 billion pledge they made over a decade ago and to replenish the Green Climate Fund. I will continue to press on these issues. I am also calling on donors to double adaptation finance by 2025 and for all parties to transform the global goal on adaptation from theory and text into real action and tangible results. We also need early pledges for the Loss and Damage Fund to help vulnerable countries recover from severe climate impacts that they already are exploring and experiencing. What was promised in Sharm el-Sheikh must be delivered in Dubai. We can no longer accept pledges and announcements without clear roadmaps of implementation. In parallel, we must upgrade our financial architecture. We need a complete upgrade. In fact, we need a surgical intervention of the global financial architecture that was built for a completely different era. IFIs and MDBs must step up, and they must up their game. They need to raise concessional capital and lower debt burdens. They need to attract and leverage private capital at a multiple, and the multilateral, public, and private sectors need to mesh together and work as true partners to accelerate the delivery of practical solutions and real impactful projects on the ground. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, the United Arab Emirates has applied this model of genuine partnership to invest in clean energy projects in 70 countries around the world. We have always chosen to meet global challenges by building bridges and working with like-minded partners on solutions in the pursuit of progress and sustainable development. That is why I am pleased to answer the call made by African leaders to seize the opportunity of green growth. And today, it is my true honor to announce a new initiative between the United Arab Emirates and Africa that aims to unlock Africa's capacity for sustainable prosperity. Your Excellencies, the Abu Dhabi Fund for Development, Etihad Credit Insurance, Masdar, the Abu Dhabi Future Energy Company, and EMEA Power will join with Africa 50 as a strategic partner under the guidance of the UAE and African leadership to develop 15 gigawatt of clean power by 2030. Working together, we will deploy, and by working together, we will deploy 4.5 billion US dollars that will catalyze at least an additional 12.5 billion US dollars from multilateral public and private sources. It is our ambition that this will launch a new transformative partnership to jumpstart a pipeline of bankable clean energy projects in this very important continent. This initiative will target countries with clear transition plans, robust regulatory frameworks, and a real commitment to putting the necessary grid infrastructure in place. It will clearly demonstrate the commercial case for clean energy investments across this very important continent. This initiative is designed to work with Africa and for Africa. It will act as a scalable model that can and should be replicated. And it will support COP28's global goal of tripling renewable energy by 2030. And here, let me take the opportunity to thank His Excellency, the President of Kenya and his government, and the African Union Commission and the EU Presidency for championing this goal alongside COP28. It's through their leadership that they are choosing a path that makes economic and climate sense at the same time. And let me extend an open invitation to all Africa's leaders to join us at COP28 to help mark a new, ambitious era for Africa's sustainable growth. Ladies and gentlemen, as COP28 approaches, I am determined that it is a turning point that delivers for everyone, everywhere. We don't want to leave anyone behind. Climate change is a global fight, and it demands a global solution. If Africa loses, we all lose. And if Africa succeeds, we all succeed. Progress for one is progress for all. Let's unite, act, and deliver to turn the rhetoric into real results. Let's turn pledges into tangible projects on the ground. And let's launch a new and optimistic future that puts the world on a climate positive pathway and offers an opportunity for all to prosper. I thank you all, and I look forward to receiving you at COP28. Thank you.
Thank you, Excellency. Excellencies, the Nairobi Declaration, like I indicated, will find itself to the UN General Assembly, and we are happy to have with us the UN Secretary General, His Excellency Antonio Guterres, who is both a politician and a diplomat who will guide the discussions and midwife the contents of our declaration to find itself into UN resolutions. Welcome, Your Excellency.
Your Excellency, dear President William Ruto, thank you very much for your initiative, your enthusiasm, and your leadership that brought us together. Asante Sana. Excellencies, friends, an injustice burns at the heart of the climate crisis, and its flame is scorching hopes and possibilities here in Africa. This continent accounts for less than 4% of global emissions, yet it suffers some of the worst effects of rising global temperatures. Extreme heat, ferocious floods, and tens of thousands dead from devastating droughts. The blow inflicted on development is all around, with growing hunger and displacement, shattered infrastructure, systems stretched to the limit, all aggravated by climate chaos not of your making. It is still possible to avoid the worst effects of climate change, but only with a quantum leap in climate action. The people of Africa and people everywhere need action to respond to deadly climate extremes. First, we need far greater climate ambition, with countries hitting fast forward and massively accelerating action to limit temperature rises and impacts. And the largest emitters must lead the charge, in line with my Climate Solidarity Pact and acceleration agenda. And here, from a low-emitting continent, Africa, I make a very strong appeal to the large emitters, the G20 countries responsible for 80% of the emissions that will be meeting this week in Delhi. Assume your responsibilities. Developed countries must commit to reaching net zero emissions as close as possible to 2040, and large emerging economies as close as possible to 2050, with support from developed countries to do so. And it's time to break our addiction to fossil fuels and invest in a just and equitable transition. We need to see credible plans to exit coal by 2030 for OECD countries and by 2040 for the rest of the world. And we need ambitious renewable energy goals in line with 1.5-degree limit. And we must bring affordable electricity to everyone on Earth, and particularly in Africa, while simultaneously reaching net zero electricity by 2035 in developed countries and 2040 elsewhere. Second, reaching these targets requires climate justice. Developed countries must present a clear and credible roadmap to double adaptation finance by 2025 as a first step towards devoting at least half of all climate finance to adaptation. And they must also keep their promise to provide $100 billion a year to developing countries for climate support and fully replenish the Green Climate Fund. And all countries must also operationalize the Loss and Damage Fund proposed at COP28 this year. Every person on Earth must be covered by an early warning system by 2020.
life began in Africa, as they say, and we exported life elsewhere. And so I feel it's important that the talk on climate change begins right here at home and we export it elsewhere.
This climate change conversation is very important for us as Africans. Of course, as been mentioned by everybody else, we are the ones bearing the biggest effect of it all. So we should be leading the conversation on how we can adapt, how we can mitigate, and how we can scale up and take advantage of the opportunities that are here in order for us to live better.
It's our time as Africa to take the lead. For the longest time, climate change has been put in the back burner. It's not been talked about as much. And Africa is the one who's feeling the most effects of this climate change that we're experiencing.
I accept that it is one thing to say what is possible and entirely another to make it happen. This summit is a moment to imagine a bold and radically affirmative African future. We do all that, but it doesn't count for much. But we do it anyway, because we love this world, because it's our home. And that is why the conversation of North versus South.
The production and trade of these critical minerals must be sustainable, transparent, and just across every link of the supply chain, with maximum added value produced within African countries. African leadership is also helping to generate innovative green economies anchored in renewable power. From the greater Horn of Africa, where over 85% of electricity generation comes from renewables, including massive hydropower projects in Ethiopia, Kenya, and Sudan, to wind and solar projects in Egypt, Algeria, Tunisia, and Morocco, to Mozambique, which gets nearly 100% of its energy from green and sustainable sources, to the increased installation of large-scale solar projects, including in South Sudan. At the same time, Africa is home to 60% of the world's best solar resources, but only 2% of global investments in renewable energy over the last 2 decades. Now is the time to bring together African countries with developed countries, financial institutions, and technological companies to create a true African renewable energy alliance. With adequate access to financial resources at reasonable cost and technological support, renewables could dramatically boost economies, grow new industries, create jobs, and drive development, including by reaching the over 600 million Africans living without access to power. Renewable energy could be the African miracle, but we must make it happen. We must all work together for Africa to become a renewable energy superpower. Excellencies, friends, just as the injustice of climate change burns fiercely here in Africa, so do the opportunities. I'm convinced that Africa can be at the heart of a renewable future. The summit and the solutions being discussed here represent a big step forward, but our countries must not be alone in this journey. At the end of this month, I will hold, on the way to COP28, a Climate Ambition Summit to summon the world's attention and committed action to climate change and the need to support developing countries as they transition to a renewable future. Ambition in mitigation must be in parallel with ambition in climate justice. Now is the time for all countries to stand as one in defense of our only home. Let's deliver the climate justice that Africans, the world, and the planet we share demand and deserve. Asante sana.
Thank you, Your Excellency. Excellencies, it is the African Union Summit in February that approved the co-hosting of this summit by Kenya and the AU Commission. And to speak to us next on his aspirations for the summit, let us welcome His Excellency President Azali Assoumani, President of the Comoros, and the chairperson of the African Union. Welcome, Your Excellency.
Kila mtu anapawa, hata Maulana hajawahi kutugawa, tulichafuta amani.
Excellences, Monsieur Ahmed Abakou, Dr. William Ruto, Président de la République du Kenya, Monsieur Antonio Guterres, Secretary General,
Your Excellency Guterres, General Secretary of UN, Mr. Faki, President of Commission of AU, Your Excellencies, heads of state and government, ladies and gentlemen, heads of international organizations, and distinguished guests. All protocols are observed. Salam alaikum wa barakatuh. At this time, all the eyes are on us, the African continent, united here to discuss at the highest level, thinking on the issue of climate. For this, we think that we are going to succeed here in this beautiful capital city of Nairobi to come up with a new impulse to the dynamics in order to fight against the effects of climate change in our planet village. This is an opportunity for me, first of all, to thank and sincerely thank our brother Ahmed Abakou, William Ruto, for his commitment for sustainable and harmonious development. I would also like to thank the people and the government of Kenya for brotherly reception that we enjoyed since we are right here in this beautiful country, and for the hospitality that we enjoy here in Nairobi. Your Excellency, ladies and gentlemen, when we see what our planet has been undergoing, we have seen devastating effect on our societies, on our economies, on our ecosystem, on our diversity in general. According to the intergovernmental experts working on climate, the world temperature is increasing. It has been increasing since 1990, and we cannot say that this is negligence, but it is the fact that we are not taking into account on this problem, and also the weak action in order to fight this effect. Therefore, we need to intensify our actions because of the effects which are dramatic on our continent, even if we are only responsible for only less than 4% for greenhouse emission. The island states like the Comoro Union, we are experiencing this, and we are not well equipped in order to fight all this. Despite all these challenges, Africa should go ahead and carry out its ambitions as written in policies and strategies at the national and regional level, and also from the contribution at the national level. Therefore, the organization of this summit on climate in this beautiful country has come at the right time so that we can come up with a conventional approach between the countries of the North and the countries of the South by highlighting the shared responsibility through dialogue in order to come up with solutions that are shared. For this, Africa should make profit from this organization so that we can come up with innovative, inclusive, and sustainable solutions by us and for us, and also define the collaboration for concrete climate action on this planet. ladies and gentlemen, honorable participants, the continent is impacted by negative natural impacts. For example, Comoros, we undergo almost every year a lot of damages and losses from the earthquake, tropical cyclones, and earthquakes, and we lose every year almost 5.7 million of dollars. My country, we have carried out programs in order to do the adaptation and mitigation. For mitigation of energy, energy is an important potential by using renewable energy, air energy, photovoltaic energy, in order to produce electricity and reduce the use of firewood in homes and industries. And for our plan of 2030 that we have adopted, our ambition is to make Comoros by 2030 a resilient country to the shocks on all dimensions of sustainable development. As far as adaptation is concerned, for Comoros and other African countries, agriculture sector has been impacted by COVID and the war in Ukraine. That's why it is very important, because we have seen the repercussion of this and aggravated by the food crisis that we have experienced. We have been experiencing on the continent. Therefore, we have to take the opportunity of this summit so that we can identify the actions that we can put in place in order to come up with a food system that is sustainable and resilient in order to guarantee our means of subsistence, and this should be sustainable. We should privilege social actions, innovation, and resilience, and come up with sustainable agriculture methods, protecting our natural resources, our health and our climate, protection of our resources, air and water resources should be also at the center of our concern. That is why the Moroni Declaration from the Ministerial Conference on Blue Economy and Climate Conference in Africa. This was organized in collaboration with the African Union Commission and UNSCA and the International Commission for Nature and the Indian Commission. They highlighted the work of climate and recognizing the role of seas and oceans in adaptation and mitigation. For this, we call upon the island states of Africa in the negotiations by highlighting their geographical specificity and their vulnerability from extreme events and different environment crises that we've been experiencing. We call upon for the support in order to have sustainable blue economy, generating employment, and come up with new partnership through reinforcing cooperation of partnership and collaboration. We suggest in this case that the financial aid should be increased. 86 billions of dollars given to Africa is very weak in order to support the current costs. We plead again to come up with mechanisms of funding because of damages and losses, coming up with facilities for all the vulnerable African countries, especially the island countries which are developing. It's also important for us Africans to think about the need to own the modern technologies, specializing in surveilling climates in order to alert in time our people when extreme events are about to happen. Ladies and gentlemen, Your Excellencies, to summarize, I can say that the world threat of climate change and the effect of environment is going to exacerbate the complex nature of the world, which affects women and youth in a disproportionate manner. I would like to say that the Declaration of Nairobi will certainly express our African solidarity, to speak with one voice, to express our African specificities. I am confident that we'll come with the true solutions to the big continental and world challenges that we will also defend at the COP28 that will take place in Republic Arab Emirates. And they need our support through the personal commitment of its president, Sheikh Nahdet Al Nahyan, through innovative technology in order to fight effectively against climate change. Asante sana. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. Excellencies, now to cap for us this opening session is the chairperson, the Committee of African Heads of State and Government on Climate Change, and also the President of the Republic of Kenya, His Excellency William Samoei Ruto. Welcome, Your Excellency.
Your Excellencies, honorable ministers, distinguished participants, delegates, ladies and gentlemen, good morning and welcome to Kenya. This African moment is a global moment where climate action is actually green growth. I am delighted to be here with you for a number of reasons. First, I am excited to participate in this summit as a scientist who has done some research on ecological impacts of human activity on fragile and precious ecosystems, including rivers and wetlands. I am also privileged to be leading the Kenyan delegation to the Africa Climate Summit. And besides, I have the honor for the time being of serving the young green continent of the future as the chair of CAHOST, the Committee of African Heads of State on Climate Change. And for hosting this event with my good brothers from the AU. And I dare say this conversation is happening in the right city, where the UN has the global environmental capital, where we have UNEP. I am therefore highly encouraged by your strong response for our invitation to attend and participate in this inaugural transformative Continental Assembly convened to focus on climate action from the standpoint of generating African solutions to global challenges. The participation in the numerous events that make up this summit has so far demonstrated impressive commitment, extraordinary enthusiasm, exemplary motivation, and unparalleled determination to confront the problems, clarify issues, engage inclusively, and define a unique strategy platform for the implementation of bold interventions to catalyze progress in the global climate action agenda. I welcome you to Nairobi, our burgeoning and sleepless green city in the sun that is bounded by a national wildlife park and a close canopy of indigenous forests. In between, our capital pulsates with the restless energy of community, enterprise, industry, innovation, learning, fun, and adventure. Please feel at home and find time to enjoy the sights and sounds of our city and country. And when I say welcome home, it's both figuratively, but also in reality. I did say yesterday, I did inform the participants yesterday that Kenya, where you are sitting, a few kilometers from where you're sitting, has been discovered the earliest remains of man on Earth. And it means that before you guys went all over the place in Africa, Europe, and America, and the rest of the world, we all began from here. And therefore, it is correct for me to tell you, welcome home. And while you are away, these are the greetings, just so that you find your way around. Jambo is the greetings. Maybe, and when somebody else tells you Jambo, you reply Jambo. It's simple. Jambo. Good. I will take you one more step. When you want to say, how are you? You say Mambo. Simple. And then the reply is Boa. Okay, let's go. Mambo. Good. There you go. So I'm sure you'll find your way around with that. Africa is a very young continent. Our median age is 19. Africa's youthfulness is precisely the attribute that has inspired African leaders to imagine a future where Africa finally
Life began in Africa, as they say, and we exported life elsewhere. And so I feel it's important that the talk on climate change begins right here at home and we export it elsewhere.
This climate change conversation is very important for us as Africans. Of course, as been mentioned by everybody else, we are the ones bearing the biggest effect of it all. So we should be leading the conversation on how we can adapt, how we can mitigate, and how we can scale up and take advantage of the opportunities that are here in order for us to live better.
It's our time as Africa to take the lead. For the longest time, climate change has been put in the back burner. It's not been talked about as much. And Africa is the one who's feeling the most effects of this climate change that we're experiencing.
I accept that it is one thing to say what is possible, and entirely another to make it happen. This summit is a moment to imagine a bold and radically affirmative African future. We do all that, but it doesn't count for much. But we do it anyway, because we love this world, because it's our home. And that is why the conversation of North versus South must come to an end.
Life began in Africa, as they say, and we exported life elsewhere. And so I feel it's important that the talk on climate change begins right here at home and we export it elsewhere.
This climate change conversation is very important for us as Africans. Of course, as been mentioned by everybody else, we are the ones bearing the biggest effect.
Into opportunity, the conversion of ideas into actions, and the turning of plans into results. It is about creating a firm consensus, designing effective strategies, securing commitments, and forging transformative partnerships that will drive climate action in the direction and at the rate required to pull our continent and planet back from the brink of a climate disaster. The urgency of this moment is informed by the knowledge that climate change is the greatest challenge, not only to the well-being of humanity, but to every existence of life on Earth, and that only urgent and coordinated action on a global scale can stop the impending catastrophe by lowering greenhouse gas emissions and reducing their concentration in the atmosphere. This is an immense and formidable challenge, even at the best of times. However, the time we are in, and in which we must implement this urgent and daunting undertaking, is a complicated and difficult time for nations throughout the world. Regional conflict with geopolitical ramifications have compounded the disruptive impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic to throw global supply chains into disarray, slowing down economies, raising the cost of living, suppressing economic growth, and straining food systems to a breaking point. The complex interplay of these circumstances also combine with other localized vulnerabilities to drive adversity in many communities, placing intense pressure on governments to reconfigure resources, allocation, and other strategic interventions. In short, it would be understandable if African leaders prioritized other commitments and relegated climate action to an afterthought. This is why I proudly celebrate the courage and imagination with which the people of Africa and their leaders have converged with extraordinary focus and commitment on the climate agenda, not as an additional or peripheral concern for public policy, but as the foremost priority and the defining intervention in our collective journey to shared prosperity. As a result, patient consultation, thorough debate, determined collaboration, and bold confrontation of facts in issue, it has become clear to us at the Africa Union, under the aegis of the Committee of African Heads of State on Climate Change, that tackling climate change also produces the solutions for the complex interconnected crisis that we face today. This is what this summit is designed to underscore. Collectively, we hold the power to transform the current continental and global trajectory. More critically, we all have an urgent responsibility to do so with a sense of collective purpose that matches the sense of urgency demonstrated by Africa's young people at the Youth Summit earlier this week. Although we are gathered here to explore the means by which we can unite in action for the greater good, we have taken full account of the fact that we are not all at the same place in terms of our experiences with climate change. All countries struggle to achieve socio-economic progress under various constraints. Due to a range of complex and interconnected historical, political, and economic factors, African countries struggle with unique, inordinate, and incredibly complex structural drawbacks in the quest to provide opportunities for their peoples to achieve prosperity. Nevertheless, we have all, in our different ways, succeeded in making progress over the years amid these extraordinary difficulties. The tragedy of climate change is that it is relentlessly eating away at this progress. And going by evidence based on scientific projections, its appetite to consume our GDP will grow in years to come. We are already losing between 5 and 15% of our GDP growth every year to the adverse impacts of climate change. At the same time, the cost of adaptation continues to rise along with the cost of living, while the cost of development capital for African countries remains prohibitive as millions of our youth remain unemployed. Only rapid and inclusive transformation powered by robust industrialization can place us firmly on a path towards sustainable resolution of these challenges. A sound understanding of the nature and causes of climate change, coupled with our experience of its devastating effects, has provided us with a robust early warning system that the classical economic development progression precedent is not available for us as a pathway to this transformation. As Africans, we are strongly persuaded that not only is it urgent for us to execute an audacious leapfrogging of the traditional developmental pathway to industrialization, but urgent ecological imperatives also dictate that we must go green first before industrializing, and not vice versa, like the advanced industrial economies had the luxury to do. I emphasize this point to underscore the principle underlying Africa's position on climate action agenda and the foundation of our strategic, institutional, and policy direction. We have an unprecedented opportunity to abandon the well-trodden yet unsustainable path of the past and forge a new route that aligns economic inclusion and shared prosperity with climate commitment imperatives. Africa's low rate of greenhouse gas emissions must not relegate us to the margins and footnotes of the global climate agenda. Africa must step forward as the cornerstone around which effective climate solutions are built. Yesterday, I encouraged participants in this summit to disregard the grievance standpoint and instead consider climate action imperative through an opportunity lens. As soon as we do that, a nexus of feasible sequences begins to emerge in an unbroken continuum from potential to opportunity. And through investments and technological innovation into green manufacturing and industrialization, including shared prosperity. Our untapped renewable energy potential, together with the world's youngest population of skilled, motivated, and knowledgeable industrial men and women, along with Africa's abundant endowment of natural assets from carbon sinks to arable land and mineral wealth, confer on us the indispensable fundamentals to swiftly become a cost-competitive industrial hub with ample capacity to decarbonize global manufacturing and green the economies of our continent, our neighborhoods, and the globe. It is good for us to be open about the need to confront a couple of basic truths. First, it is demonstrably clear that none of the world's industrialized nations will be able to achieve their net zero goals within the time indicated by scientists to avert further warming. Secondly, unlocking Africa's potential to undertake economic transformation along a green trajectory is the most feasible, just, and efficient way to attain a net zero world by 2050. With those two combined, Africa's capacity to limit its own emissions is the clearest pathway to enable the world to achieve its climate action targets. Africa's opportunity is a global opportunity and a chance for humanity to redeem its intergenerational legacy. Scientific experts have consistently demonstrated from analyzing available evidence and making projections that these can be achieved while generating jobs in their millions, creating enormous investment opportunities, and catalyzing unprecedented economic growth. Under a proper green growth paradigm, climate action also serves as a robust engine for poverty reduction, employment and wealth creation, and economic transformation. By definition, effective climate action must entail technological leapfrogging to disrupt and invent the industrial development pathway and go green first. It must also involve effective decarbonization of global production and supply chains and deliberate efforts to remove carbon from the atmosphere at scale. Understood this way, green growth aligns perfectly with opportunity-oriented perspectives of climate change, which presents Africa with its most important means of achieving stability, prosperity, and development beyond middle-income industrial status. To achieve green growth, we in Africa have committed to move with speed and under various effective frameworks to develop the necessary instruments, institutions, policies, and strategies through which we shall design and implement incentives that will accelerate the delivery of priority actions. We shall also support our youth, especially those in enterprise, to enable innovation and deliver localized solutions for the benefit of our communities, and at the same time attract other African and international investors to finance climate action. Every step of this journey will require partnership that facilitate collaboration and multilateral collective action to achieve just development financing mechanisms, deliver equitable access to markets for Africa's green products and services, and a just regime that provides liquidity, debt relief, and affordable investment capital everywhere on the continent at scale. We are all connected to our common humanity and a shared stake in the vitality and livability of our planet. We are also bound firmly by the fact that Earth is all we have, that we have no other home, and that no alternative planet to resort to when things burn here. The most salient implication of this knowledge is that we cannot approach climate action and human development from a disconnected or adversarial standpoint. We cannot pursue climate action through insular, solitary policies. Global warming cannot be mitigated by air conditioning our little pockets and corners of the world. Prosperity cannot and must not be pursued in a zero-sum exclusive fashion because the resulting injustice and inequality are the drivers of inequity, poverty, conflict, and activities that threaten biodiversity and encourage pollution. We are all interconnected. That is a statement of fact. And this existential moment provides us with a unique opportunity to reconnect with our shared humanity. In this summit, you will have heard and will continue to learn more about the bold, transformative, innovative fruits of partnership, cooperation, and collaboration that are already underway in various parts of Africa. I invite you to pay close attention to as many of these cases as possible, and assure you that you will be surprised, challenged, and inspired by the many wonderful demonstrations of bold initiatives in the face of many opportunities. That is the essence of this summit. It is an orientation, and in fact, an orientation run designed to familiarize us with our journey into the future, driven by African solutions, powered by African resources, and anchored on African opportunities. The collaboration I have in mind must be bold in ambition, broad in scope for their vision, deep in terms of diversity of their stakeholders, and long in terms of their geographical reach. An impressive example that I have had opportunity to interact with is the Global Center for Adaptation, an organization based in Rotterdam in the Netherlands, whose constitution is an appealing emblem of our aspiration from the aspirational design of its global headquarters and futuristic regional headquarters in Nairobi, comprising green walls and roofs, as well as rain gardens, to the collaborative culture of its staff. Unsurprisingly, the center is intended to inspire the world to thrive with nature instead of pursuing the dangerous course of seeking to thrive at the expense of nature. The center spearheads the Africa Adaptation Acceleration Program, a focal point collaboration with the University of Nairobi, Africa Development Bank, and the Africa Union Commission as part of the continent's response to the climate crisis. I am delighted to announce that as an outcome of this summit today, Kenya will host the GCA Africa headquarters here in Nairobi. Ladies and gentlemen, it has taken tremendous courage, effort, and determination to leave behind us the old continent that was historically profiled with intense negativity. The Africa whose people neither are there to be seen or heard has summoned the confidence and readiness to confront hard facts, engage truthfully, and forge a common position on critical issues that project a new, bold, radically transformative voice into the global discourse. And let me say here that we have discussed potential. And it is true, we need to have a conversation about Africa's potential. Why? Because we have been profiled negatively. The continent of disease, war, poverty. But we are stepping forward to say, look here, Africa is the continent with 60% of the world's renewable energy assets. Whether you talk about wind, whether you talk about solar, geothermal, hydropower. Number two, we're saying Africa is the continent that has 40% of the world's critical minerals for energy transition, whether you talk about nickel, cobalt, lithium, manganese. This is where those reserves are. Number three, this is the continent, the youngest continent with a median age of 19. 25% of the world's population will be living in this continent by 2050. We will have 40% of the world's workforce by 2100. This is the continent number 4 that has 2/3 of the world's uncultivated arable land that can transform through smart agriculture into the store, the production store of the world. And number 5, this is the continent that is the lungs of the world. We have the largest natural carbon sequestration infrastructure. In fact, we dare say, if there was a company for collecting garbage globally, and I'm talking about carbon garbage, Africa would have the largest shares because we have the largest lungs. The only problem is that those who produce the garbage refuse to pay their bills and profile the company as broke when it is actually them who have refused to pay the bills. So that is our continent. It's a continent of tremendous potential. And that is why Chinua Achebe told us that until the lion learned the art of writing, all stories glorified the hunter. I think we have learned to write, I think we have learned the art of writing. And that is why we are going to write our own narrative. That is the continent that we belong to. Let me also say another thing, opportunity. Yes, this climate crisis, climate change, and the climate crisis that comes with it, yes, it is true, we contributed the least. Yes, it is also true, we are suffering the most. But in this crisis is Africa's opportunity. And that is what we want to focus on. Africa's opportunity to unlock the tremendous resources that we have for green energy transition. And we must exploit this opportunity. And number 3, so that I conclude, is that this is the continent that has the highest investment potential. We are only limited by 2 things. Number 1, we are limited, as I said earlier in my statement, by high interest rates for development capital. Many of our countries, and we are here and they say figures don't lie. 9 countries are already in debt distress in our continent, over the cliff. 13 countries are classified as high risk, and another 17 countries are classified as moderate risk. And the biggest contributor to debt distress in our continent is high interest rates. We pay 5 times more than others, meaning that in fact, the architecture is set up in a manner that if you borrow, it will be difficult for you to pay. And that is why we need a conversation, and a very candid conversation. And we're saying this in all honesty around how do we get concessional funding? How do we pay as much as others are paying? How do we get Africa away from paying 5 times more? And I asked in this gathering, we're not asking to be favored. We're not asking to be treated differently. We want a fair financial system that treats everybody equally. Ladies and gentlemen, that is not too much to ask. A fair international financial architecture is not a fair proposition or an unfair proposition to make. Number two, many of our countries are headed into debt distress because of climate change. Let's be honest, we are suffering the most, whether it is in the Sahel with drought, whether it is in the Horn of Africa with drought, whether it is in South Africa and the southern part of our continent with cyclones. And we are saying the suffering is across the globe, but we carry the biggest brunt. I'll contextualize this. And because of climate change, we are forced to divert resources that are meant for economic growth into dealing with the effects of climate change. I will contextualize this. In Kenya, we lost 2.5 million heads of livestock in northern part of Kenya. Combined with Ethiopia and Somalia and Djibouti, we lost 9.5 million heads of livestock. So what did I have to do in Kenya? So in Kenya, I've had to increase resources meant for school feeding from 1.5 million children in school, under school feeding. We've had to scale up this year to 4 million kids in school to be put under school feeding. And we've had to rearrange the budget to provide for that. So when we say climate change is destroying our economies, we are not making statements. We are making statements of fact. And that is what is driving many of our economies in that direction. And let me contextualize this further. When I was first elected as a member of parliament in a rural constituency in Kenya, I represented a community that is so proud that they think debt is not a good thing. They are risk averse and very debt averse. So, to try and encourage the community that time, then there was this phrase, and I want to say it in the indigenous community. There was a phrase that Kaigai Kobarin Besen Kosir Kobarin Banan. I will explain to you what that means. There is Besen and there is Banan. Besen is debt. Banan is poverty. So it is said in this community, if you must die, it is better to die of debt than to die of poverty. Because you are dying anyway. So it's... And so, to contextualize that into this debate, we don't want to die in this continent. We don't want to die of debt, but we also don't want to die of poverty. That is why we must have a conversation around multilateral development banks and concessional financing and how we can finance our economies using resources that do not punish us. And when we make this proposition, we have tremendous respect for our multilateral development banks. They are doing their best we have the best of respect for them, but we believe they can do better. We believe that there is an opportunity. We need to explore the SDR, Special Drawing Rights window. And this time round, we want to have that window when it's made available because it is possible. Let those who need the resources get, not those who don't. In the last experience, those who did not need the resources got more than those who needed the resources. We need to have a paradigm shift this time round. And number two, we believe that it is possible to expand concessional financing through leveraging on the balance sheets of these institutions. And finally, to be able to unlock the resources that we need to be able to drive these new investment and financing opportunities, especially for green energy. We believe it is time to have a conversation about carbon tax. I said we need to have a conversation about carbon tax. And I mean we need to have a conversation about carbon tax. Yes. We believe it is the only way, it is among the ways that we can raise additional and adequate resources for us to finance our development. And while we are thinking about financing, for us in Africa, three things are very important. As they say in Kenya, mambo ni matatu. Number one, speed. It takes inordinate to access any meaningful resources. Number two, it requires scale, because we've all agreed that enormous resources are required. And number three, affordability, so that we all pay the same. And that is why this event is both Africa's Climate Summit and a global pre-COP28 convention. Africa is meeting and Africans are talking. The world is listening. We must use this opportunity to lead the world in a new direction towards a future that holds immense promise for both Africa and the entire world. The many initiatives showcased at this summit testify to the courage of African enterprise and innovators to pursue breakthroughs, exploit opportunities, develop models, and take risks to make our tomorrow better than our today. When the global stocktake is released, there will be another opportunity to test our courage and resolve by asking each other hard questions in the spirit of fashioning the new way to achieve rapid improvements. We have therefore committed to conclude this summit with a declaration which will firmly encourage everyone to keep their promises, even in hard times, as a matter of justice, to hold each other to account, to collaborate, and to innovate. This African moment is a global moment. We are in word and deed full stakeholders in this global journey and its primary navigators at this stage. I urge everyone at this summit to exercise bold leadership and contribute to our efforts to reconfigure global markets and international institutions around African aspirations and strategic goals. I call on each one of you to do their part so that the potential that lies in our continent can deliver opportunities for Africa's youth, communities, enterprises, and nations to actualize a future for all of us. It is a matter of long-standing African wisdom that if you want to go fast, go alone. But if you want to go far, go with others. We have a long way to go and no time to lose. In this moment of existential urgency of whole humanity, I dare say that we have our ancestors' permission to innovate a way not only to go fast, but also go together, provided we consult thoroughly, engage in good faith, collaborate effectively, and proceed inclusively. This is an emergency, and we must undertake climate action and green growth with this understanding. I thank you. God bless you. God bless Africa. Asante sana.
Your Excellency, you have some tasks to perform, so please come back to the stage.
I have been requested to ask the climate envoy from America, who is scheduled to take a flight, to take a few moments and come and speak to us. My good brother, John Kerry, is somewhere in this audience. Welcome, because he also has a declaration to make and an announcement to make. Welcome, John.
Mr. President, distinguished presidents, Your Excellencies, fellow ministers, colleagues, friends, ladies and gentlemen. I have a feeling that after that extraordinarily powerful presentation by President Ruto, nobody should say anything. We should just act. Maybe I should start by just saying Jumbo. Works. Mr. President, thank you for convening everybody here. Over the years, I've been privileged, Mr. Secretary General, like you. We've been at many of these conferences, and the words come easily. The actions seem to have been more difficult over time. It's a great honor for me to be able to be here representing President Biden at this very important summit. I want you to know, as I listened, and as you listened, I could feel this room, something is happening. This is different. I feel that. This is different. I think, Mr. President, I would just say to you, your leadership is palpable. Feel it. What you have said today, there is such a clear path ahead for all of us. Africa is meeting. Africa is speaking. Africa is deciding. And nothing could make a greater difference, I think, on a global basis, given what you just heard from the President about the remarkable resources that are here in Africa, about the young people who are thirsty, hungry for a future. So Africa and this moment offer an enormous opportunity. This problem that we are facing is human-made. It's about pollution. It's not very complicated. It doesn't take a rocket scientist or a mathematician or equation work to its end in order to understand what's happening. Humanity is threatened by humanity, by the decisions that we are unwilling, it seems, to make. So at this moment, I believe it is clear that Africa presents some of the greatest opportunity in the world. To do what? To win this battle about how we heat our homes, drive our vehicles, light our factories and our homes. This is about fundamental production of energy. And if we will make the right choices about that, the future is different for everybody. That's what's so attractive and important about what President Ruto was saying. You want to have a cleaner life? You want to have a healthier life? Less cancer? Eliminate 8 million people dying every single year because of the lack of quality air that we breathe? All of that comes from the unabated burning of fossil fuel. And it is challenging, if not threatening, our very planet that we all live on. So 20 countries produce 80% of all the emissions. Mine is one of them. 20 countries. And it is critical for all of those 20 countries to immediately take steps to get on the path to the Paris Agreement, to align, to have the ability to keep 1.5 degrees alive. That will only happen if those 20 countries take the lead and make it happen. Crisis now is also, if justice is to mean anything, it certainly has to mean that if there's going to be a transition, everybody has to be able to share in the benefits of that transition. Right now, it is clear that you can't talk about a just transition, when some people, there's no transition at all. Or when some people, there is acute, unfair debt that swallows and drowns the choices that those countries have to make. My friends, adaptation, which wasn't on the front burner in the early years that we've been working at this, but it is now, and it should be, for the simple reason that without adequate adaptation, we don't make it. That's the predicament that we've created for ourselves for where we are now. So adaptation is critical, and the damage Mother Nature is telling us on a weekly, daily basis. Every 18 days, we have a $1 billion climate event somewhere on this planet. So adaptation is critical. President Biden has now launched a program called Prepare, the President's Emergency Program for Adaptation. And he has committed that we are going to help at least 500 million people in developing countries, especially in Africa, to be able to adapt to the worst impacts of this crisis. He has committed the United States to work alongside African nations to lead the way in adapting to and managing the impacts of the climate crisis. And as part of Prepare, he is providing, or will fight with the Congress and guarantee that we will provide $3 billion annually for adaptation for the $12 billion program that he believes is essential in order to be able to do our part to adapt to this challenge. It is why we are working with partners on the Transitional Committee this year to design an effective fund to help vulnerable developing countries respond to loss and damage. And it is why last year in Sharm el-Sheikh, the President decided that the United States needed to try to accelerate that process. We joined with our friends in Europe and elsewhere to say that no, it's not adequate to do that over a 2-year period. We need to close out and understand where we're going with the Loss and Damage Fund in 1 year, this year, when we all meet in Dubai. So in addition, as part of implementing Prepare, I'm pleased to announce today also, we're going to provide an additional $30 million for climate resilient food security efforts across Africa. First, $20 million to the Africa Adaptation Initiative for the Food Security Accelerator, and that will invest in agricultural businesses and help them create their own independent climate resilient supply chains. Second, $10 million will go to the Climate Resilient Adaptation Finance and Technology Transfer Facility to scale technologies so that we can advance adaptation efforts like cold chain storage, which would help maintain the quality and safety of food from the farm all the way to the homes of people in the world. We've learned that adaptation saves lives, creates jobs, and obviously it's just plain old common sense. Roads and bridges that are built today can only spur growth and curb poverty if they're still standing tomorrow. So in many ways, we have learned Africa. Africa suffers to a great degree the worst impacts of the climate crisis. And it is essential every country step up to help other nations, and particularly Africa at this point, in order to be able to adapt to the climate impacts. But at the same time, we also have to continue to mitigate, and I think you all understand that. Of the 20 most impacted countries in the world, 17 are in Africa. That tells the story. We all have a moral obligation. The rest of the world, and particularly the developed world, the world that has those 20 countries with the biggest economies, we have a fundamental imperative for all of us to get this job done. Ladies and gentlemen, I am personally convinced we are going to get to a low carbon, no carbon economy. I see incredible things happening around the world. With the IRA in the US, we are breaking new ground on battery storage, on new technologies for wind turbines that will get 30, 40 megawatts of power from one turbine. New technologies for accelerating the transition with hydrogen and so forth. All of the things that President Ruto talked about. The vision that your president has put forward today is not just a vision for Africa. It's a vision for the world. President Ruto is showing a path for everybody to follow, and I hope everybody will feel impacted by what he has said here. One of the great philosophers, I just close by sharing this with you, one of the great philosophers of the Enlightenment, people decided that they would listen to science and not be browbeaten into somehow believing that everything was the sort of result of a vengeful God punishing people for their sins. But people decided and understood certain scientific facts make a difference. And they're real. And that has guided us for the centuries since then. Those pathfinders helped us to understand how to break ground and build a world in which we can have vaccines and deal with new technologies to go to the moon and so forth. We can win this battle, but we only win it if we make some fundamental decisions. Immanuel Kant, one of the great philosophers of that time, wrote, "Science is organized knowledge. Wisdom is organized life." Well, right now, if you look around you at the life we all lead all around this planet, science and the knowledge are unequivocal. All that is left for us is to summon the wisdom to organize the world to do what we know we have to do. That's the vision that I heard from President Ruto, and that is the vision that I'm convinced will come out of this week of great effort at this summit, which can help to prepare for a groundbreaking COP at which we do the job people are asking us to do. Thank you very much.
Excellencies, we are moving on to a very important session where we will be listening to each and every one of you as you make your national statements. But a few minutes before that, I want to usher in Zain to, and Your Excellency, President William Ruto, to undertake a signing ceremony here then we move on to the national statements. Thank you, Excellencies.
Thank you very much, Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. This is a very significant moment in the Africa Climate Summit. We are going to start this green revolution together and launch right now Kenya's green hydrogen strategy. I would like to request our leaders to step forward and sign off this important strategy. I'd like to invite Thomas Ostros, the Vice President of the European Investment Bank, Dr. Barbel Koffler, Parliamentary State Secretary of Germany, Her Excellency Ursula von der Leyen, President of the European Commission, and His Excellency William Ruto, President of the Republic of Kenya. Please do come onto the stage. We have a symbol here on the stage that will be representing this agreement. And so we're going to ask all four of our leaders here to take one of the pens that you'll be given and sign this very important moment. And just for context, as we get set up over there, over 93% of Kenya's electricity comes from renewable energy sources with a drive to reach 100% by 2030. I would like to invite also on the stage European Union ministers to come and stand behind our party here, as well as Mr. Davis Chirchir, Cabinet Secretary for Energy and Petroleum, and we can take a group photo of this extremely important moment as we launch Kenya's green hydrogen strategy. Green hydrogen plays a very central role in Kenya's green energy transformation. I mean, it really is going to offer a very significant potential to produce local green fertilizer and drive emissions-free transportation fuel. So this is a critical moment as we all gather here and take a photograph and really document and understand that this is a key step in reaching this ambition. And as the signing takes place, congratulations, everyone. A round of applause. And this really does demonstrate how Kenya is prioritizing economic expansion and charting a course for the country to harness the potential of green hydrogen as a key driver of energy transition, promotion of environmental stewardship, as well as the generation of jobs. Thank you so much, Excellencies, for this very critical moment and for launching the green hydrogen strategy. I'd like to invite Mike Gitonga to take over, the head of protocol.
Thank you very much, Zain. And distinguished guests, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, we are now going to have a short interlude of music as we set up the stage in preparation for the statements that are going to be made immediately after. So I'll request that we have the stage set up for the next session that we're going to have. We'll have a short interlude of music, then we'll have the statements to follow shortly after. Thank you.
Life began in Africa, as they say, and we exported life elsewhere. And so I feel it's important that the talk on climate change begins right here at home and we export it elsewhere.
This climate change conversation is very important for us as Africans. Of course, as been mentioned by everybody else, we are the ones bearing the biggest effect of it all. So we should be leading the conversation on how we can adapt, how we can mitigate, and how we can scale up and take advantage of the opportunities that are here in order for us to live better.
It's our time as Africa to take the lead. For the longest time, climate change has been put in the back burner. It's not been talked about as much. And Africa is the one who's feeling the most effects of this climate change that we're experiencing.
I accept that it is one thing to say what is possible and entirely another to make it happen. This summit is a moment to imagine a bold and radically affirmative African future. We do all that, but it doesn't count for much. But we do it anyway, because we love this world, because it's our home. And that is why the conversation of North versus South must come to an end.
Life began in Africa, as they say, and we exported life elsewhere. And so I feel it's important that the talk on climate change begins right here at home and we export it elsewhere.
This climate change conversation is very important for us as Africans. Of course, as been mentioned by everybody else, we are the ones bearing the biggest effect of it all. So we should be leading the conversation on how we can adapt, how we can mitigate, and how we can scale up and take advantage of the opportunities that are here in order for us to live better.
It's our time as Africa to
We're moving to our next session. And here we're going to hear from the heads of state. This has been an incredibly consequential morning, ladies and gentlemen. And I'd like you to consider for a moment Africa setting the agenda. Ladies and gentlemen, if you feel proud and inspired, please clap your hands. If you feel proud, clap your hands. Let's hear it. They came, the world came for our human resource. Africa did not benefit. They came for our lands. Africa did not benefit. Now Africa is at the table. Once again, a call for everyone to take their seats. I'm going to welcome Your Excellencies up. Settle the room down, please.
Excellencies, we are moving to the national statements, and this segment will be moderated by His Excellency, the President of the Republic of Kenya, Excellency William Ruto. Please take the stage. And the session will also be co-chaired by His Excellency, President Assoumani, President of the Comoros. Excellency, please take the stage, as well as the Chairperson of the African Union Commission, Excellency Musa Mahamat. Please take the stage, Your Excellency.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. We are now transiting into the next session, where we will ask our heads of state to make their country statements if they wish to. And we are going to start. Okay. I'm going to ask our elder, President Sasu Denis Nguesso, to make his statement. Your Excellency, sir. And you can choose whatever podium. You can use that or you can use this. Let us request the people standing to please take your seats. Let's take our seats. Thank you very much.
Monsieur le Président de la République du Kenya, cher Williams, Monsieur le Président en exercice de l'Union africaine,
the President of the African Union, Sheikh Assoumani, the President of the Union of Comoros, ladies and gentlemen, the heads of states and governments, the Secretary General of the United Nations, the President of the African Union Commission, Madam President, Chairman of the European Union, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to express my profound gratitude to His Excellency William
République du Kenya,
President of the Republic of Kenya and the people of Kenya for the warm welcome accorded to me as well as to my delegation. In addition, I have the pleasure to express my gratitude to the Republic of Kenya and to the organizers for the kind invitation to attend this first African Climate Summit, which obviously is focusing on climate in Africa. To develop green growth and the solution for financing climate for the world and Africa and the world. And is an essential theme for which we should mark our presence. And I want to congratulate warmly His Excellency Mr. William Ruto, President of the Republic of Kenya, for the successful convening of this summit here in Nairobi. The quality of the exchange of views should lead to a recommendation for the establishment of a new architecture of the financing of climate financing, as mentioned in Paris in the beginning of July this year. The issue of the financing of on more than one score. It is for the perennial nature of our collective efforts in favor of climate, for the preservation of biodiversity, and I would even add to guarantee peace, civil peace, and the development of our peoples. Ladies and gentlemen, heads of state and government, dear colleagues, without anticipating the conclusions of the summit, that's Climate Summit, whose success for our continent is of great and capital importance, may I mention the way we still have to go. which in my humble view, before we meet in beginning of December at COP28 in Dubai, and then to talk and speak with one voice. Indeed, in mid-September in New York, on the margins of the UN General Assembly, we'll have high-level discussions that will focus on the establishment of a sovereign carbon market, which is in line with the interests of our African nations. Then it is in Brazzaville, in the Republic of the Congo, that on 26, 27, and 28 October 2023, the summit of the three basins of ecosystem of biodiversity and the tropical forests, the last stage before COP28, a summit that the President of Brazil, President of Indonesia, and the Democratic Republic of the Congo have wished, and the Republic of the Congo have wished. A summit that will lay down cooperation between the Congo Basin, that of Amazon, and the Borneo in the Southeast Asia. And I will have the single honor to host as the chairman of the Congo Basin Commission. Excellencies, heads of state and government, ladies and gentlemen, the three basins concentrate, in fact, 80% of world biodiversity and constitute the regulator of the carbon balance of the world. The Brazzaville Summit will aim at South-South cooperation in order to support the efforts of the United Nations in favor of the restoration and conservation of tropical forests, which the various places and the mangroves, and will establish a platform for proposals, and I dare to say, to establish relations and to weigh in with all its weight on the resolutions that will be adopted at COP28. Cooperation between the three basins will not be an exclusive club that will be dealing only with only its members' interests. On the contrary, by acting on the negotiations for COP28, it will serve as a lever for climate justice and access to international financing by all the South countries in the South Hemisphere, and then to meet the exigencies of our continent. From then on, the success of the Brazzaville Summit, after that of Nairobi, is decisive for Africa, which the Secretary General of the United Nations be thanked already for this invaluable support. Excellencies, heads of state and government, and you all, you who fight for climate justice, I invite you to join us in Brazzaville which will be a summit before COP28 of Dubai. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Let me now give the floor to President Isaias Afwerki, the President of Eritrea. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Excellencies, heads of state and government, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen. Allow me first to express our gratitude to President William Ruto for hosting the African Climate Summit and for the warm hospitality accorded to us. Climate change poses, by all accounts, one of the most pressing challenges of our times. Its impact in Africa will be immensely aggravated, compounded as it is by a host of other major hurdles. Extreme weather changes that entail more frequent and intensified droughts, irreversible changes to Africa's ecosystem, marine biodiversity, as well as rich flora and fauna, cannot bode well in Africa's potential and aspirations for rapid economic growth. They will also mortgage the opportunities and livelihood of future generations. True, there are reservations and skepticism on the accuracy of the forecasts and doomsday predictions in relation to the voluminous scientific data collected so far. There are also those who bemoan media hype and sweeping generalizations pronounced in various conferences. But these differences of emphasis notwithstanding, the gravity and urgency of the situation will be downplayed only at our collective peril. In this perspective, and in our modest view, efficacy and impact of our collective response is positively correlated with the linkage and synergy we develop in a three-pronged approach: the national, continental, and global platforms and networks. The policies we articulate and the implementation mechanisms we map out at the individual national level will not provide the primary panacea to this global challenge. The second tier approach that has particular relevance to the summit, here are the programs that can be pursued at the collective continental level and supplement our individual national endeavors. In this context, Africa can tap and incorporate the numerous scientific measures undertaken by global players in the field to bolster its purposeful mitigation measures. At the institutional level, it will be important for our continent to establish its own professional African advisory panel to undertake timely research and complement available literature on the subject. The structure can cascade down to regional and national levels as appropriate, so as to generate comprehensive and accurate scientific research and information that has wider validity and applicability for all the constituent parts. Africa must strive to foster and develop viable and national framework of cooperation on climate change at the global level or in the third track. This is vital both for reasons of synergy and also because Africa deserves much support as it has largely been on the receiving end. Indeed, its greenhouse gas emission footprint has been and remains comparatively small. In conclusion, I remind this August gathering that Africa mobilize its own resources rather than extend hands for handouts that may aggravate the existing situation by inviting interference and corrupt practices, while mobilizing our own resources will be enabling and motivating creativity at the level of the continent. I urge everyone to not be attracted by the billions that are being promised by so-called donors. Rather, we would like to mobilize our own resources and get away from this dependency that will definitely compromise everything at the level of the continent. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. A round of applause for President Afwerki. Let me now take this opportunity to request my brother, His Excellency President Paul Kagame, the President of Rwanda, to make his statement. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Excellency, Dr. William Samoei Ruto, President of the Republic of Kenya. Excellency Azalia Assoumani, President of the Union of the Comoros and Chair of the African Union. Excellencies, Heads of State and Government. Excellency Musa Faki Mahamat, Chair of the African Union Commission. Excellency Ursula von der Leyen, President of the European Union Commission. Right Honorable Patricia Scotland, Secretary General of the Commonwealth. Excellencies, First Ladies, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. First, I wish to thank President Ruto for hosting us in a beautiful and vibrant Nairobi for the Africa Climate Summit, organized in collaboration with the African Union. Every year, the world is reminded of the real and growing threat of climate change. Recent findings tell us all kinds of stories, including that July was the hottest month ever recorded, continues to carry the burden of rising temperatures, despite contributing the smallest share of global greenhouse gas emissions. We cannot just keep talking about it without doing what is required to fix the problem. This is unfair, but in the long run, playing the blame game is not the answer. A more pragmatic approach is for Africa to be a key player in the search for global climate solutions. Africa stands united and should remain so in this and in its position. In this regard, allow me to take this opportunity to commend President Dr. William Ruto for his exceptional leadership of the Committee of African Heads of State and Government on Climate Change. In Rwanda, we want the private sector to play a greater role in building a green economy. Our strategy is to position ourselves as an attractive destination for international climate financing and investment. That's why the COP27, at that summit, Rwanda launched IREME Invest, a green investment facility created by the Rwanda Green Fund in partnership with the Development Bank of Rwanda. So far, more than 200 million has been mobilized, US dollars that is, from domestic and international partners, including the European Investment Bank and the Green Climate Fund. We have also been working closely with the International Monetary Fund as a participant in the Resilient and Sustainability Trust. We have access to long-term financing to further integrate climate into our economic policies. This is a good sign that the international community is taking seriously the call to reform our global financial architecture. But there is still room for improvement. In this context, I welcome the discussions held at the Paris Summit for a new global financial pact. The Bridgetown Initiative, spearheaded by Prime Minister Mia Mottley of Barbados, also deserves consideration and serious attention. Any meaningful structural change must favor debt restructuring and lower interest rates, as President William Ruto has so eloquently explained. As chair in office of the Commonwealth, Rwanda supports the development of a multi-dimensional vulnerability index led by the United Nations in partnership with the small island developing states. Gross national income, GNI, does not accurately measure a country's vulnerability to climate change. In any case, small islands and developing states should not be penalized for having higher income levels. Ultimately, what Africa wants is fair and equal partnership, which takes our priorities into account. That is going to be the basis for trust and solidarity. I hope this summit will serve as a good foundation for discussions later in this year at COP28. I thank you for your kind attention, and Mr. President, thank you for convening us here.
Round of applause for President Paul Kagame. Thank you very much, Your Excellency. Now is the opportunity for President Salva Kiir, the President of South Sudan, to make his statement. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Bana ba Kenya namugeze ndi mulembe lundi baya mumbe kama rumwelezera ko bulaiwa kuba nenda kamatunda baburu mu Kenya.
Your Excellency, Dr. William Ruto, President of the Republic of Kenya, and Chairman of the Committee of African Governments on Climate Change. Excellencies, heads of state and government, Your Excellency Antonio Guterres, United Nations Secretary General, Your Excellency John Kerry, United States Climate Change Envoy, Your Excellency Dr. Sultan Ahmed Al Jaber, COP28 President Designate, and the UAE Special Envoy for Climate Change. Honorable Ministers for Climate Change, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. Let me start my remarks by expressing my deepest gratitude to the government and the people of Kenya for the warm welcome and for successfully hosting this first Africa Climate Change Summit. Excellencies, the biggest threat faced by humanity today is climate change. It is a threat whose effects are felt by all. But its causes have their roots in the action of a few.